My wife cheated on me, my daughter helped cover it up, so I divorced her, got revenge, and moved on. Life's unexpected twists and turns can make that happen. To those who stayed in touch, I appreciate it. There isn't enough time for the love you send. Seasons change, and so have I. You don't need to wonder why. There's no time left. No time left for you. Picture a typical family. I'm the father, Trevor Fruiton, a 45-year-old guy with a receding hairline, in decent shape but no six-pack abs. I could stand to lose 10 lbs and prefer contacts over glasses. I still don't need reading glasses. The mother of the family, Michelle, is also 45 and has a slight tummy and a well-rounded figure, a look I prefer. She's an average woman, not strikingly beautiful or ugly, who wears glasses and insists on her full name. Then there's our 21-year-old daughter, Allie, a smart college senior who's gained some weight since her high school volleyball days. She's fiercely independent and vocal about women's rights, though she still relies on us. I'm the only one working, and finances have been tight. I didn't want Allie burdened with student debt, so she lives at home. But that doesn't mean Michelle or Allie don't enjoy nice things. I drive an old F-150 while they have fancy luxury cars. Our home has little equity, and they funded their lifestyle with home equity loans. Our neighborhood is like many suburban areas with occasional block parties. We're not particularly close to our neighbors, except for the neighbors next door, whose daughter Sally is Allie's best friend. After Allie started college, I felt lost. We had spent so much time together, and now there was a void. Even my volunteer work didn't seem to help. So one night, I asked her if she was happy. I inquired, "Michelle, are you happy?" She replied, "Happy with what?" I continued, "Your life. You've pulled away from me and lost your spark. I miss the time we used to spend with Allie. I guess I'm bored. How about us? Is there something I'm doing or not doing for you?" Michelle assured me, "We're fine. I have no complaints. Why all the questions?" I just wanted her to be happy. "Maybe you can find a counselor to help you find balance and improve your mood." I pondered her suggestion. "I'm not sure. I'll think about it." With a little chill in the air, I dropped the subject. However, 2 weeks later, Michelle started weekly sessions with a life coach. You might think that I hoped things would heat up in our bedroom, but no. We maintained our usual twice-a-week intimate schedule. Are we normal? I have no idea. I've never discussed my life in bed with anyone, and I don't pry into my friends' intimate details. Mark and Cindy, our neighbors to the south, are in their 60s. Mark is not the handiest guy, and Cindy loves to bake, which has led to a few extra pounds for me. One day I was working on Mark's sauna pump and overheard a conversation. They discussed, "Our sliding patio door is making that scratching noise again. Unless Michelle is back from her mother's, it must be Ally. I haven't seen him in a while. So I'm sitting in the backyard gazebo. I overheard Allie's conversation. She mentioned, "He's inside somewhere. His car is still here." I couldn't believe my ears as I heard her say, "God, Mom, you're outdated. Give Max a try. Sally says he's a wild one and make sure you're satisfied. Maybe this is what you need to spice things up in the bedroom. You've been complaining to our daughter about our love life? That's just not right." I know. You should think about it. By the way, Dad told me he's going hunting next weekend. I'll have Jeff invite Max over. He might be scrawny, but he's into you. Sally also mentioned that his size is just right for some fun. I was fuming, thinking, so my daughter is trying to set Michelle up with Jeff's friend. You don't have to do anything, but since you've never tried anything like that, consider experimenting with Max. I was seething, and the next pause was due to my boiling anger. The bee and her offspring are plotting to end my marriage. What did I do to deserve this? Okay, well, let me know. Love you too. Bye-bye. I was really angry. Unfortunate I didn't injure myself while fixing that frustrating pump. Things were miserable at home all week. I went out of my way to annoy Michelle and Ally. It worked, and I spent most of the week in my office or out in the garage. I also sharpened and cleaned my power tools. I didn't postpone my hunting trip, though. I had someone keep an eye on Michelle's activities. Seeing pictures of Allie, Jeff, and a skinny guy entering the house around noon on Saturday wasn't a good sign. Allie and Jeff left around 2, and the skinny guy left at 4. When I returned late Sunday, Michelle was trying to be affectionate, but I wasn't having it. While it didn't confirm anything, I noticed Michelle was sitting strangely, with her legs crossed and leaning left more than usual. She seemed a bit uncomfortable. Later in the kitchen, Allie sealed their fate by playfully slapping Michelle behind, and they both giggled with fake coughs. I felt a weight on my chest and worried that the people I was hunting with might have exposed me to something. I decided to sleep on the living room couch to avoid Michelle. In the morning, I announced that I was going to the doctor with a fake illness, claiming I had trouble breathing. My boss had no issue with me taking the day off. My plan was to pretend to have COVID, which would give me time to move forward with my exit strategy. With accumulated sick leave and vacation time, I could take enough time off to reach our traditional Christmas Eve dinner. Announcing a COVID diagnosis usually keeps people at bay. Did I actually have COVID? I wasn't sure. I was fully vaccinated and felt healthy, but my heart was broken, and I wanted to part ways with 4 people. While my lungs were fine, I checked into an extended stay hotel. There was no reason for me to live like a pauper. Michelle seemed relieved when I told her I'd be out of quarantine in time for Christmas Eve. She and her daughter called me twice a day to avoid revealing my plans. I was polite but pretended to be tired to get off the phone. I spent my time plotting revenge and making preparations, like updating wills, beneficiaries, and emergency contacts. Apartment hunting was challenging and drove home the finality of my decision to divorce Michelle and push Ally into the real world. When you're consumed by anger, all sorts of thoughts cross your mind. Most of them could land me in jail, which didn't align with my future plans. The idea of hiring an escort to trap Jeff came from watching a news story about a company that did the same to get rid of unwanted employees. It was a double-edged sword that would also hurt Ally, which, in my opinion, she deserved. Our artificial tree was lit up with blinking red, white, and green lights, and pine cones gave off a holiday scent. We gathered around the dining room table for our Christmas Eve tradition, which we had maintained for 23 years. The first 2 years were without Ally. Michelle had cooked a meal, which was now in front of us. Normally, we'd offer a short prayer of thanks, but not this time. I stood up to speak, but it wasn't going to be a cheerful toast. I began by asking Jeff about Heather, and as I did, his face lost color. Allie turned her curious gaze toward him. Allie and Jeff had been together since high school, and it seemed like they'd be together for many more years. Things were about to change, though, Jeff stammered, claiming he didn't know a Heather. I pressed further, mentioning the raven-haired beauty with ruby lips he was with last Sunday night. Jeff was as stunned as a deer in headlights. At this point, he resorted to denial, claiming he couldn't recall the name, but his words lacked conviction. I confronted him with an audio clip from my cell phone, where a voice could be heard saying, "Okay, Heather, you're awesome. Don't stop. God, I'm coming again." After turning off the recording, it was clear that the voice was Jeff's. Allie went into a rage, accusing him of deception and demanding that he leave. Before Jeff could get up, I stood behind him and pushed him back into his chair. Jeff and I prevented Ally from attacking him. I instructed Michelle to take our daughter into the other room and calm her down, explaining that I and Junior were going to have a talk. Michelle escorted Ally out of the dining room and into the kitchen. It wasn't done quietly, as Allie's string of 4-letter words echoed off the walls. It only took a few minutes to explain to Jeff how things would unfold. He was to warn Max to stay far away from me, or Max would deeply regret his existence as a man. Jeff understood where he stood and what limited options he had. From my perspective, a manila envelope moved, and Jeff agreed to do one last thing for me. I called out to the kitchen, asking Michelle to come back in. With Allie, they both looked shocked and tearful. "Let me explain how I got that recording, Jeff. Her name isn't Heather, and I don't know her real name. She's an expensive escort. I must add, I hired her to seduce you and record the encounter. There's also a video if you'd like to watch it." Allie exclaimed, "Daddy, what the hell, you hired her?" I admitted, "I did, sweetie. How does it feel to be betrayed? You know, stabbed in the back." Michelle made a tiny noise, and Allie's eyes briefly darted toward and away from her mother. Both women were in tears. "Jeff, do you have something to say?" I turned on the video mode of my cell phone camera. Jeff stood up, took the folder in front of him, and then addressed Michelle. "Michelle Fruiton, you've been served," he said as he handed the folder to Michelle. I wasn't sure if she would vomit or faint. She would likely do one or the other shortly after regaining her composure. The pine cones couldn't compete with the impact of Jeff handing Michelle divorce papers. While Allie and Michelle consoled each other in the master bedroom, I took charge outside. Allie's early graduation gift was loaded onto a carrier and driven away. Everything from her car was left in a trash bag on the front porch. Michelle's BMW followed soon after. But the difference was that her things were moved to a 23-year-old sedan, symbolizing our 23 years of marriage. My lawyer reminded me that I still had to provide transportation for Michelle. With our credit cards paid off and canceled, both of Allie's cards were canceled since I was the CO signer. I took another shot of bourbon. Cell phones were canceled as well. I had to give Michelle a basic phone with limited talk time and text messages. Allie received no such consideration. Both kept their iPhones with all the bells and whistles. In the garage, there was a for sale sign that I swiftly planted in the front yard with a few hits of my hammer. I couldn't actually sell the house yet since Michelle's name was on the title, but I wanted her to know what our future held. Instead of listening to the Christmas music playing in the living room by the tree, I retreated to the basement. Sitting in the dark was comforting at times, especially when I heard the commotion above me as they realized that none of their possessions were working. I was called some less than Christian names. Those names were mild compared to the ones I had been yelling in my empty hotel room while preparing for this day. "Trevor, we need to talk," was their statement. They speculated that maybe I went for a walk, noticing that my car was still at home. But my car was missing. They thought perhaps Dad had taken it, but he couldn't be driving both. They questioned the presence of an unfamiliar car in front of the house. Their phones weren't working, and they suspected I had canceled their service. They decided to go see if Cindy would let them use her phone. Calm returned to the house, but it was a tactical error on their part. I locked the entry doors. Now they were out of the house without working phones or credit cards. Both left their purses inside, so they had no identification on them. I felt no remorse when I shredded their driver's licenses. It may be petty, but I'm sure it will cause them discomfort as they try to rebuild their lives. Refilling my shot glass, I turned on the television and watched a few minutes of a cheesy feel-good special. Our situation couldn't be farther from the heartwarming story on screen. Sitting in silence seemed like a better choice. There was a commotion at the front door when Michelle and Allie returned. It was then that Michelle's daughter, whom I no longer claimed as my own, realized what was in the trash bag on the porch. Allie shrieked, "Oh my God, this is everything I had in my car. Daddy got rid of my car." Michelle wasn't buying it. He wouldn't do that. It's just not something he would do. "Well, Mom, maybe the reason your car is missing is that he sold it too. I'll be mad if he did. I love that car." With the doorbell ringing every 2 seconds, it was hard to catch all of their conversations. Michelle was furious. "Trevor, open this door right now. It's freezing out here." I shouted back at them, "Well, Mitch, the keys to your new car are in the ignition. That orange and green Malibu parked in front of the house is your new set of wheels. All your belongings from your old car have been moved over. I'm told the heater takes a while to warm up. It has a full tank of gas. Maybe you could offer your Estimax and stay at his place. He probably still has a thing for you." One yelped, "Liar," and the other said, "He knows." "Trevor, please let me explain." Michelle made a feeble attempt to extend the conversation. A few seconds of silence passed, and Michelle tried a sweeter voice. "Trevor, I know you can hear me. Say something." "Merry Christmas. You better leave, Michi, and take that woman with you." A few minutes later, the old Malibu roared to life. It sounded like it needed a new muffler, but I wasn't surprised, as the guy practically gave me the car to get it off his hands. It wasn't getting fixed on my dime. Without any fanfare, the two traders drove away from the house. It had been ages since I heard about anyone dying from carbon monoxide poisoning due to their muffler. Maybe I'd get lucky. Probably not. About an hour later, I noticed my father-in-law's phone number lighting up my cell phone. We've never been close, but we tolerate each other. After considering whether to answer, I let it go to voicemail. "Hey Trevor, I've got a couple of upset women here. Thought you might be able to shed some light on the situation. Call me. By the way, Merry Christmas." I muted my cell and sipped some spiked eggnog. Gradually, I came down from my adrenaline rush. The blinking lights of the fake tree put me to sleep. The sun was shining on this cold Christmas morning. All the dishes were still on the dining room table, but the microwave did a good job of heating up my ham and cheesy potatoes. Ham and cheesy potatoes work any time. There were gifts waiting to be opened, but Santa left me nothing, as those gifts under the tree were meant to be opened after dinner. Had anyone even noticed I hadn't given a single gift to any of them and I didn't open theirs? Instead, I gathered my most cherished belongings. I didn't include any photos of the family. Any that I found were now scattered on the ground. It took Michelle a few days to find me at my hotel. The sun had set, and there was a bitter breeze. I left the latch on when I answered the door. I half expected another poinsettia sales pitch for a youth sports team, but it was a pale-faced Michelle without her usual makeup or done-up hair. Michelle pleaded, "Trevor, please don't close the door." I didn't close it as I replied, "What do you want, Michi?" she asked, a chance to explain. "Can I come in?" I firmly responded, "No." She continued, "Please, Trevor, your neighbors don't need to hear this." I replied, "What part of no don't you understand? I'd be happy to explain it to you." Michelle sighed. "Okay, let me start by saying how sorry I am. I can't explain my actions." I asked, "What actions are you talking about, Michi? Please." She urged, "Trevor, not out here. Let me come in and talk about it." She revealed softly, having closeness with Max. I reacted, "You had something with Max? Well, don't that beat all?" Her eyes widened as I continued. "You didn't know?" She admitted, "I suspected, but now it's confirmed. Actions have consequences." "Wait, you were going to divorce me without any proof?" I replied. "Guessed right, didn't I? Have you found an attorney yet?" She responded, "I'm working on it, but we don't need a divorce. I'll do anything you want to save our marriage." I said, "A little late for that. Why didn't you decide to do anything to save our marriage a month ago?" "I know why. It's because you're selfish and think you're above consequences. You thought you could do whatever you wanted without repercussions. Did you tell me immediately? A day later? A week later? How many others have there been? Michelle recoiled at the venom in my voice. That was the only time. You have to believe me. One stupid decision shouldn't doom our marriage. I pressed, which stupid decision? I count many. Planning to cheat might get you a reprieve. Cheating is a deal breaker. Hiding your cheating ensured no chance of reconciliation. Worst of all was involving your daughter. Your daughter, as I want nothing to do with her anymore. This is all on you. If you had kept your bedroom matters private, she would have never been involved. I hate you. Some of the neighbors were getting their kicks watching this drama unfold. I told her, Trevor, I said I'm sorry. How can I make this up to you? You can't. I hope I'm better off without you. Maybe I will be. Maybe I won't. But it's on my terms. Divorce your cheating self and move on, understand? Please, Trevor, I know you're hurting, angry, but please don't do anything for a couple of weeks. It was just one afternoon. What can I do to convince you? I replied, just leave and never bother me again. Now, if you'll excuse me, halftime is over and the bowl game is starting again. Thanks for stopping by, not. I closed the door. Michelle knocked and begged softly, but my noise-canceling headphones did their job. I don't know how long it lasted, but she wasn't there in the morning. 11 months later, I sat in my one-bedroom apartment, continuing the Christmas Eve tradition. Alone by choice, I prepared a simple meal that I cooked myself after getting the hang of cooking. They say you get stabbed in the back, but in reality, it shattered my heart, ego, and confidence. My self-respect, however, remained intact. Many nights I wondered if I overreacted. Not once did I agree with that thought. I became disposable, so I left. Case closed. My time in the limbo of divorce left me feeling defeated. I was often irritable, and my boss had to reprimand me for snapping at coworkers. As time passed, I withdrew from social life and became a recluse. My CO workers learned to keep their distance, and I focused on doing my job well. I skipped company parties. Friends attempted to set me up on dates, but I turned them down one by one, and eventually they stopped calling. My self-pity seemed never-ending. I took up running, and the sight of my earbuds discouraged people from approaching me. Between my new hobby and cooking for myself, I needed to put on some weight since none of my old clothes fit. Occasionally, a CO worker would compliment my appearance, but it rarely went beyond that. The divorce proceedings stretched out for 9 months, and our house sold quickly. Instead of monthly support, Michelle received a substantial share of the proceeds from the sale. Allie and Jeff went their separate ways, with Jeff blaming me for setting him up with Heather. It's always someone else's fault. I wasn't there with Heather, he was, and he was weak. Like most men his age, a seductive woman can easily lead them astray. As for Allie, she left me angry voicemails, but I never returned her calls. Maybe someday I'll answer, but I wouldn't bet on it. I neither received an invitation to her graduation nor attended it. The situation was particularly challenging for Michelle, as she hadn't held a full-time job since our marriage. My attorney prolonged the financial matters as much as possible. Once the house finally sold, I repaid all the money the court ruled she should have been receiving as maintenance. And now her comfortable lifestyle was gone. The same applied to mine. During some of the attorney conferences, Michelle tried to convince me that she had been incredibly foolish, but I remained stoic, which led to a few tears. Hate is a powerful emotion, and I couldn't seem to control mine. 12 months later, we continued the Christmas Eve tradition in my apartment. Macy, a friend who had been through a similar experience, joined me. No, we weren't in a romantic relationship. I wasn't ready for that yet. After we finished cleaning up the dishes, Macy led me to the middle of the living room, and we danced closely. At times, I missed the warmth of a willing woman against me. But after about 10 songs, Macy wiped away a tear and left. We were both damaged goods. Allie's tone in the voice messages she left about once a month changed. She sounded apologetic, but I never returned her calls. My mother accidentally revealed that Michelle had moved in with someone new. I was surprised that my reaction was mostly indifference. I started making small talk with people again. Former CO workers avoided me, and new ones thought I was weird. Making friends was challenging, but I managed to bridge the gap with Macy, and we remained friends. In late January, I received a letter from Allie. I debated whether to open it, but curiosity won. The letter contained a short note and a selfie. Daddy, I'm sorry that I did you wrong. As you can see in the picture, I'm pregnant. I was wondering if you could find it in your heart to include a grandchild in your life. If not, I understand. Love, Allie. The return address was a few counties over, and there was no mention of a husband in the picture. I felt torn. I resented what she had done to my life, but I had always wanted grandchildren. It would be a few weeks before I responded. In the meantime, Macy and I parted ways. We both knew we were only there for each other to lean on. She decided to move far away and start over. With a few lingering hugs, she left my life. To keep from going crazy, I took up pickleball at the rec center. It's similar to tennis, but with different rules. Eventually, I played with people of similar abilities, which felt like junior high school. During one game, I accidentally hit Shannon, one of the players, and her friends teased her, suggesting I should kiss it to make it better. I blew her some kisses, and as we were heading out, she asked if I could buy her a soft drink. She said I was very quiet and shy. We walked to a nearby Jamba Juice and continued chatting. We learned about each other, and Shannon was a great conversationalist, unlike me. She eventually asked if I was seeing someone, and I admitted I wasn't, and I wasn't sure if I ever would again. Shannon inquired about my previous relationship. Did she die or leave you? I responded, she cheated on me, and I either couldn't or wouldn't accept it. It's been a few years, and, well, I guess I'm not over it. Shannon then asked, what about you? Are you dating anyone? I replied, no one. She seemed surprised. Really? I elaborated, I go on dates, but that's about it. When was the last time you went on a date? Shannon shared, well, I haven't been on a proper date since we separated. I've had people over for dinner, but that's it. I asked, when did your marriage end? She told me that was December, 26 months ago. Pretty sad, isn't it? I reassured her, not really. When I was dumped for a younger woman, it took me a couple of years to regain the confidence to try again. This entire conversation was making my palms sweaty. Shannon noticed. Let's change the subject, I suggested. Why did you start playing pickleball? Shannon explained, my self-pity was getting tiresome, so I thought I needed something new to do. I shared, that's how I got into it too. My friends convinced me, and I've come to enjoy it. How about you? Shannon said, yeah, I got a paddle and playing is helping me come out of my shell. Well, I have to run. See you tomorrow? I'm playing at 4 p.m. I replied, sure, nice chatting with you, Shannon. She offered some encouragement. You too, Trevor. Hang in there. Things will only get better. That evening, I felt good enough about myself to respond to Allie. Allie, I'm willing to try. You and I will never be close, but I'd like to at least meet my grandchild. Please let me know when the time is right. Under no circumstances will I be in the same room as your mother. Mr. Fruin, as Allie showed in the selfie, I estimated a May or June delivery date. I'm not sure if Allie received my response, as I haven't received another letter from her. The next day at pickleball, Shannon was quite flirtatious, as were a few other ladies. It felt good. After hitting a particularly good shot, Shannon said, you know, Trevor, you look really good in that shirt. I bet you look even better out of it. The women giggled as my face turned red. Funny you should say that, Shannon. I was thinking that you looked really good in those yoga pants. I bet you'd look even better out of them too, I responded. There was hysterical laughter as Shannon turned bright red. Then the ladies started chanting, take them off, or take them off, take them off. I obliged and took my shirt off. Shannon shook her head vigorously while wagging her finger at me as if I was in trouble. A few of the ladies whistled as I put my shirt back on. Shannon mouthed, you're terrible, at me. I blew her a kiss. After the games, there was some light-hearted banter among the ladies, with one of them joking about looking great out of yoga pants. Shannon impatiently waited her turn. I engaged in a friendly conversation, and eventually Shannon asked if I'd buy her a soft drink. I responded, I was just about to ask you. Shannon playfully remarked, nice yoga pants, huh? Pretty proud of yourself, aren't you? As we enjoyed our drinks, I mustered the courage to ask Shannon out for dinner and a movie. Fearing rejection, I was relieved when she thankfully agreed. Having been out of the dating scene for over 27 years, I felt clueless, awkward, and scared. Initially, it was hard, but with time, I began to relax, and my previous upbeat personality started to emerge. After several dates, Shannon suggested I spend the night. One evening, Shannon surprised me with a personal question. She asked, who were you thinking of when we were intimate? I had to pause and appreciate her. You, I replied. I wondered what you saw in a person like me. I see a mirror reflection, Shannon said with a smile. Our passionate connection grew, and we became more intimate with time. Shannon eventually introduced me to her family and grandchildren, which was initially awkward due to their protective nature. However, as time passed, they accepted me. In early June, Shannon cuddled up to me in bed and suggested celebrating our closeness. As the moment grew more passionate, I realized what she meant, and I shared my knowledge of Allie giving birth to a girl 2 days ago. Our passions flared briefly, and then we made love for an extended period. The next day, I sent flowers to Allie to acknowledge her new motherhood. A day later, I received an overnight letter from Allie expressing her sincere apologies and the desire to reconnect with me. She mentioned her understanding of the lessons I had tried to teach her and the changes she had undergone. She also mentioned her daughter Bonnie and the possibility of us reuniting. I shared the letter with Shannon, who found Allie's words sincere and asked me what I intended to do. I expressed my concern about the impact on my relationship with Shannon and received a warm hug and a loving kiss in response. Shannon emphasized the need to let go of the past so that our relationship could flourish. With Shannon by my side, I knocked on Allie's door, surprising her. We shared affectionate cheek hugs and entered her apartment. I held Bonnie, and she didn't cry, reminding me of how small baby hands and feet are. Shannon brought up Allie's marital status, and Allie explained that Bonnie's father was reluctant to commit. Throughout the evening, Allie and I kept our distance. Before leaving, Shannon urged me to express my love to Allie, and I returned to Allie's apartment to give her a hug and tell her that I still loved her. 6 months and a few weeks later, the traditional Christmas Eve dinner was hosted in my apartment, with Shannon, Allie, and me holding Bonnie. I delivered the Christmas blessing, and we all dined and exchanged gifts. Shannon and I spent the night at her house, marking a change in our relationship. 12 months later, we celebrated Christmas Eve at Shannon's house. Life had moved forward, and I had found contentment in my life's new chapter.
I guess this is the part where I lay it all out. No sugarcoating, no holding back. I found out my wife, Emily, had been cheating on me with multiple men. It wasn't like one of those moments where you discover something small and piece it together over time. No, this hit me like a goddamn freight train. At first, I couldn't even process how deep it all went. But trust me, the betrayal cuts deeper than you can imagine. You think you know someone, right? You build a life together, share everything, and then boom, it all falls apart. Let me backtrack for a second. I met Emily during our uni days. God, she was everything back then. Funny, smart, driven. She had that smile, the kind that pulls you in, and you can't help but get lost in it. We were at some party, those wild nights where everyone's trying to drink away their student loans, and she just stood out. I remember thinking she was it for me. We clicked right away. Our conversations flowed like we'd known each other forever, and we talked about everything. Our dreams, our future, what we wanted out of life. It was one of those perfect moments, you know? One you never forget. Fast forward a few years, we got married. It was a small ceremony, nothing too extravagant. I didn't care much for the whole wedding circus, and neither did she. At least that's what I thought. Life was good for a while, and I don't know when things started to shift, but looking back, I realized there were signs. They always say hindsight is 20/20ths, right? It started small, late nights at work, more girls' nights out. And suddenly, she had all these new friends I'd never met. The first few times, I didn't think much of it. She was ambitious, and her job as a project manager kept her busy. But then, she started coming home drunk more often, which was weird because Emily was never much of a drinker. At least, not before. I'd ask her about it, and she'd brush it off, telling me it was work stress or just one of those nights. At first, I wanted to believe her. I did. But when you're lying in bed, night after night, waiting for someone who used to be excited to come home, and now she's stumbling in at 2 or 3 in the morning reeking of booze and God knows what else, you start to question things. You start snooping, because what else can you do when your gut's telling you something's off, but she's telling you it's all in your head? I'd see her texting late at night, laughing at messages, and hiding her phone when I walked into the room. She'd tell me it was just the girls, but it didn't feel right. There was always that nagging feeling at the back of my mind, the kind that keeps you up at night, wondering what the hell is going on when the person you thought you knew inside out starts becoming a stranger. One night, she passed out after another night with the girls. This time, I couldn't take it anymore. I'm not proud of it, but I grabbed her phone. The thing is, she never let me touch it before, always had an excuse like work stuff or confidential projects. But I'd figured out her passcode weeks ago, just hadn't had the balls to check it until then. And yeah, I knew I was crossing a line, but at that moment, I didn't care. I needed answers. I unlock it, my hands shaking like crazy. First, it's just texts. Harmless at first glance, right? A bunch of group messages with her friends, some work stuff. But then I saw a name I didn't recognize, Rob. And right after that, Dave. Okay, I thought maybe just some coworkers. But then I kept scrolling and my heart dropped. Photos. Videos. Jesus Christ, I'll never forget that feeling. My chest felt like it was collapsing in on itself as I scrolled through them. It wasn't just one guy. There were multiple. Fucking multiple. And these weren't just flirty texts or innocent selfies. These were full-on videos of her at some kind of party. A party I sure as hell wasn't invited to. Group sex parties. Man, I didn't know. Doing things with my wife I never imagined she'd be into. I thought I knew her. How wrong I was. Every new image was like a fresh stab in the gut. And by the time I put the phone down, I was shaking so badly. I thought I might throw up. I looked over at her, passed out like nothing was wrong, while my entire world was disintegrating in front of me. I didn't wake her. I couldn't. I just sat there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the fuck had happened to my life. How did we get here? Was it my fault? Had I pushed her into this? Was I so clueless that I didn't even see it coming? Or had she always been like this, and I just blinded myself to it because I wanted to believe in the fantasy we'd built together? The thing is, once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. It changes everything. And the anger? It starts as this slow burn in your chest, but before long, it's consuming you. I wanted to confront her, to scream, to break everything in sight. But I didn't. Not yet. I wasn't ready for the fight that was coming. Instead, I spent the rest of that night trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I've heard people say revenge isn't worth it, that it won't make you feel any better in the end. Well, they're full of shit. After discovering what Emily had been doing behind my back, the only thing keeping me from going insane was the thought of getting back at her. I knew it had to be personal. It wasn't enough to just leave her or expose her. No, I wanted her to feel that same pain, that gut-wrenching twist in your stomach when you realize everything you trusted was a lie. That's when the idea of Catherine came to mind. Yeah, Emily's mother. Catherine was, well, let's just say she aged like fine wine. She was still married to Emily's dad, but their marriage had been on the rocks for a while. Emily mentioned it in passing, something about them not really being in love anymore, just going through the motions for the sake of appearances. Perfect. It started slow, subtle. I didn't want to rush anything. I knew I had to play the long game with this one. After all, Catherine was no fool. She'd seen her share of life, been through her own battles, and I couldn't afford to spook her. So, I began positioning myself as the supportive son-in-law. After all, I had to keep up appearances while I planned my move. We'd meet for family dinners, just casual things. I'd offer to help her with little things around the house, or we'd grab a coffee now and then, talking about how tough things were for both of us. And, of course, I played the part of the heartbroken husband like a pro. I'd drop little hints about my troubles with Emily, how I felt distant from her, how I didn't understand why our marriage was falling apart. Catherine, being the nurturing type, ate that shit up. She started opening up to me about her own issues with Emily's dad, how she felt lonely, unappreciated. It was like clockwork. The more she opened up, the closer we got. Then came the perfect moment. One evening, I suggested we meet up for dinner, just the two of us. Nothing unusual, right? After all, she'd been my confidant these past few months, and I was so grateful for her support. We went to a nice, quiet place. I could see she was flattered. I played it cool, kept the conversation light at first, but as the wine flowed, things started to shift. She was talking about her marriage problems, how she felt trapped, how she missed feeling desired. That was my in. I leaned in, and I'll never forget the look in her eyes when I brushed her hand, just barely. She didn't pull away. In fact, she leaned in a little too. It was all too easy. After another bottle of wine, I suggested we head back to her place. I made sure to keep my tone casual, like it was just another night. But inside, I was boiling with a mix of anger and excitement. This was it. When we got back to her place, it didn't take long before things escalated. A few more drinks, some lingering touches, and suddenly we were on the couch, kissing like teenagers. It wasn't some romantic, passionate thing. No, it was raw, fueled by years of frustration on her part and my need to get back at Emily. In the back of my mind, I felt this twisted satisfaction. Every move, every touch, it was all part of the plan. I don't know if Catherine even knew what she was getting into. Hell, maybe she did. Maybe she wanted it just as much. Either way, That night, I got what I wanted. We ended up in her bed, and I'll spare the details, but let's just say revenge can feel pretty damn good when you're angry enough. The next morning, Catherine acted like it was some big secret, like she was suddenly guilty about what we'd done. She kept saying how no one can ever know and how it shouldn't have happened. But I wasn't interested in her guilt. I didn't care about what she thought or how she felt. For me, it was just step one of the plan. A few days later, I decided it was time to drop the bomb on Emily. I wasn't going to be subtle about it. No, I wanted her to feel the full weight of what had happened. So I waited until we were sitting at the kitchen table, just a regular evening after work. She was on her phone, probably texting one of her many friends from those sick parties she went to. I had to fight back the urge to throw her phone across the room. Instead, I leaned back and said, as calmly as I could, "I slept with your mother." You know that moment when someone's world completely shatters? I saw it happen right there in front of me. Emily froze, her eyes wide, like she couldn't process what I'd just said. She stammered, trying to form words, but all that came out was, "What? That's not. You're lying." I smiled. "Oh, I'm not." We had dinner, a few drinks, and then, well, you know how these things go. I could see the anger starting to rise in her. She wanted to lash out, to scream, but she was too stunned to move. So I twisted the knife a little deeper. "If you want details, I'm happy to share." She jumped up from the table, her face red with fury. "You're fucking disgusting," she screamed, her voice cracking. "How could you do that? My mother? You're sick." I stood up too, leaning over the table. "Am I?" I spat back. "What about you, Emily? Huh? How many guys have you fucked behind my back? You think I don't know? Group sex parties? Really? Who's the sick one here?" The room was filled with this heavy silence, broken only by her labored breathing. I could see the realization setting in. She knew I was serious. She knew I wasn't bluffing. And for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. I didn't give her the chance to recover. "Yeah, Emily, I know everything. Every disgusting detail. And guess what? Your mother? She's better than you." That was it. She snapped. She threw her phone at me, screaming every insult she could think of, but I just stood there, calm as ever. She was losing control, and I'd never felt more in control of the situation. This was the revenge I wanted. I wanted her to feel that same humiliation, that same betrayal. As she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her, I felt satisfied. It was twisted, sure, but after everything she'd done, it felt right. Once the dust settled after my little revelation about Catherine, I knew what my next move had to be. Divorce. It wasn't even a question. I couldn't stay married to someone like Emily, not after what I'd seen, not after what I'd done. This marriage had been a sham for God knows how long, and now it was time to burn it all down. But I wasn't going to just walk away quietly. No, I had evidence, solid damning evidence, and I was going to use every bit of it to make sure she never forgot what she did to me. The first step was getting a lawyer. I wasn't playing around. I needed someone ruthless, someone who would go for the throat, and I found just the guy, this shark of a divorce attorney named Harris. He didn't ask a lot of questions, just wanted to see the evidence I had. So I handed him the videos, the photos, everything I'd gathered from her phone. I'll never forget the look on his face when he opened the files. It was like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Well," he said after a long pause, "I think we've got more than enough to bury her." And that's exactly what we did. Filing for divorce wasn't as satisfying as I thought it would be, but it was a necessary step. I wanted out of this mess, and I wanted to take as much with me as possible. So we started compiling everything, every video, every text, every receipt that showed Emily was living this double life. I wasn't just out for revenge anymore. I was going for full destruction. I wanted her to be humiliated, to lose everything she thought she could hide behind. When the court proceedings started, it was like stepping into a gladiator arena. Emily showed up, looking like she hadn't slept in days, probably because she knew what was coming. But I didn't give a shit. She'd done this to herself. She had the nerve to act all innocent, though, like she hadn't been caught red-handed screwing multiple guys behind my back. She sat there with her lawyer, this sleazy guy who tried to paint her as the victim, saying she'd made mistakes and that our marriage had fallen apart over time. Yeah, no shit. But those were mistakes. Those were choices she made over and over again. The tension in the courtroom was thick. Every time her lawyer tried to spin some sob story about how we'd grown apart, I'd watch the judge's face. He wasn't buying it. Not when we had the kind of evidence we did. When it was my turn to present the videos, I made sure they were played in full view of everyone in that room. I wanted them to see the real Emily, not the innocent wife she was trying to play. And let me tell you, it was a show. Emily sat there pale as a ghost as the videos played. The sounds, the images, there was no denying what she'd done. You could see the horror on her face as everyone watched. It was fucking priceless. Her lawyer kept trying to object, saying it was too personal or irrelevant, but the judge didn't stop it. He let it all play out minute by minute. By the time it was over, Emily looked like she was going to be sick. She knew there was no way out of this. I testified too, of course. I laid it all out. The late nights, the lies, the hidden phone, the group sex parties. I told the court how I found out, how I confronted her, how she had the audacity to deny it at first. And the whole time, Emily just sat there, staring at the floor, unable to even look at me. The court battle lasted longer than I expected, with Emily's lawyer trying every trick in the book to paint her as the victim. But the evidence was too strong. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. I got the house, most of our assets, and a clean break from the woman who destroyed our marriage. It was a win, but it didn't feel as good as I thought it would. Maybe because, deep down, I knew there was more I could do. That's when I decided to take it one step further. You see, just getting a court ruling wasn't enough. I wanted everyone to know who Emily really was. I wanted her life to implode the way mine had. So, after the ruling, I took those videos, the ones from her phone, and I uploaded them to an anonymous website. Don't ask me which one. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. It was one of those shady sites where people share all kinds of messed up stuff, and within hours, the videos were spreading like wildfire. I sat back and watched it all happen. I watched the views climb, the comments pour in, and I felt this strange sense of satisfaction wash over me. Emily had no idea what was coming. She had no idea that her dirty little secret was now out there for the world to see. And that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted her to feel the humiliation, the shame, the loss of control. It didn't take long for the news to spread. I heard whispers from mutual friends, saw posts online, people were talking. Emily was becoming infamous, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Her work found out, too. Turns out being a project manager and starring in group sex videos doesn't exactly mix well. I didn't have to do anything after that. Her life just unraveled on its own. People started distancing themselves from her. She lost her job, and eventually, even her new friends from those parties didn't want anything to do with her. And you know what? I didn't feel bad. Not even a little. She had it coming. All of it. That night, after watching the fallout unfold, I slept better than I had in months. There was something oddly peaceful about knowing she'd finally gotten what she deserved. I didn't care if it made me a bad person. At that point, I'd stopped caring about a lot of things. All I cared about was making sure she paid for what she did. And she did, in full. After everything that went down, the court battle, the videos, the fallout, I knew I had to get my shit together. You can only live in revenge mode for so long before it starts eating you alive. So, I made a decision. It was time to rebuild, to focus on myself for once. No more thinking about Emily or what happened. I wanted to move on, even if I wasn't entirely sure how to do it. First thing I did was start exercising. I'd never been the gym rat type, but I needed something to burn off the anger, the frustration. Every morning, I'd hit the gym, running on that treadmill like I was trying to outrun my own thoughts. At first, it was just about getting through the day without feeling like I was about to explode, but slowly, it became something more. I started to enjoy it. I pushed myself harder, lifting weights, running further. And you know what? It helped. Physically, I felt better, stronger, like I was in control of something again. And that was a feeling I hadn't had in a long time. Then I started doing things I hadn't done in years. Visiting new places, picking up old hobbies I'd abandoned during my marriage. I always loved photography, but somewhere along the way, I'd stopped taking pictures. Emily wasn't into it, so it just kind of faded away. But now, I had all the time in the world, so I dusted off my old camera and started going on these weekend trips. Sometimes I just drive without a plan, stopping wherever looked interesting, snapping photos of landscapes, people, random moments. It was like rediscovering a part of myself I'd forgotten. But no matter how much I tried to fill my days with new things, the past still lingered. At night, when everything was quiet, my mind would drift back to Emily. I'd replay the good times, the memories of when we were happy. It wasn't all bad, you know? We had moments, genuine moments, where I thought we had it all. And that's the hardest part. It's not like everything was terrible from the start. There was a time when I loved her, when I thought she was my forever. But all of that was overshadowed by what she did, by the lies and the betrayal. I'd lie awake, thinking about how things could have been different. What if I'd caught on sooner? What if I'd been a better husband? But those thoughts are poison. You can't change the past, no matter how many times you go over it in your head. It's like standing in front of a wrecked car, wondering what would have happened if you'd taken a different road. The crash still happened. You just have to deal with the aftermath. One day at work, I met Sophia. She was new to the office, fresh out of some marketing firm in another city. We started talking. At first, just casual work stuff, but then we started finding common ground. She was into photography too, and we'd share stories about places we'd been, the kind of shots we liked to take. There was something easy about talking to her, something that felt safe. But even though I was drawn to her, there was this wall inside me. I couldn't let her in, not completely. I'd been burned too badly, and the idea of opening up to someone again scared the hell out of me. Every time I thought about letting my guard down, I'd hear that little voice in the back of my head, reminding me of what happened with Emily, reminding me that trust is fragile, and once it's broken, it's damn near impossible to rebuild. Sophia was patient, though. She didn't push. We'd hang out after work sometimes, grabbing a drink or two, talking about everything and nothing. And slowly, I felt myself loosening up around her. I could be myself, without the weight of everything that happened dragging me down. She wasn't like Emily. At least I hoped she wasn't. But still, that fear held me back. In the middle of all this, Tom, my best friend, was a constant. We'd been through thick and thin together. And after everything with Emily, he was there for me in ways I didn't even realize I needed. He'd call me up on weekends, drag me out of the house, even if I wasn't in the mood. He'd push me to try new things, to meet new people, to stop wallowing in the past. I owe him for that. If it weren't for Tom, I probably would have just drowned myself in bitterness and regret. One night, after a few too many beers, Tom gave me the tough love talk I didn't want but definitely needed. We were sitting at some dive bar, watching a game, when he looked over at me and said, "Dude, you've got to stop living in the past. Emily's gone. It's over. You got to start thinking about what's next." I shrugged it off at first, but he wasn't letting it go. "I mean it, Jack. You're a good guy. You deserve better than to let that bitch ruin the rest of your life. You got to move on, man. Meet someone new. Live your life." And for the first time in a while, I actually thought about what he was saying. He was right. I couldn't keep letting Emily's betrayal define me. Yeah, it happened. Yeah, it fucking hurt. But I was still here. I was still standing. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to start looking forward instead of back. Sophia and I started hanging out more after that. It wasn't anything serious at first, just friends, just talking. But I could feel the connection growing little by little. She had this way of making me forget about everything else, even if it was just for a moment. I wasn't ready to jump into anything yet, but for the first time since the whole nightmare with Emily, I felt like maybe I could. The fear was still there, though. Trusting someone again? That was a mountain I wasn't sure I could climb. But with Sophia, I didn't feel rushed. She let me go at my own pace, never pushing, never expecting more than I was ready to give. And that was something I hadn't felt in a long time. Building trust again is harder than I thought it would be. After everything that happened with Emily, it's like there's this invisible barrier I can't get past. But with Sophia, something feels different. She's patient, and I don't feel like I have to rush into anything. We started opening up more, talking about real stuff, our pasts, our mistakes, the things that shaped us. It wasn't easy for me to go there, to dig into the parts of my life I'd been trying to bury. But with her, it didn't feel as overwhelming. Maybe because she never judged, never pushed me to be something I wasn't. It was one of those nights after work, just the two of us sitting in some quiet corner of a cafe. I hadn't planned on opening up, but it just came spilling out, the whole story. The betrayal, the court battle, the videos, everything. I expected her to react, maybe look at me differently after knowing the mess I'd been through. But she just listened, nodding every now and then, giving me space to get it all out. And when I finally finished, all she said was, "That must have been hell for you." It caught me off guard. No pity, no lectures, just understanding. It was like a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying had lifted. For the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I wasn't defined by what Emily had done. Maybe there was more to me than just the guy who got screwed over. Sophia and I kept growing closer after that. It wasn't some fairy tale romance, not by a long shot. We took things slow, sometimes painfully slow. There were days when I'd retreat into myself, when the memories of Emily would come back like a tidal wave, pulling me under. Those moments when I'd remember the good times, the times when I thought everything was fine. It was like trying to scrub a stain that just wouldn't come off. No matter how much I tried to focus on the present, the past kept creeping in, reminding me of what I'd lost, of the person I used to be before it all went to shit. One night, lying in bed, I found myself staring at the ceiling, going through those old memories like I had so many times before. It was always the same reel. Emily's laugh, the way she used to look at me, the plans we made. And then the sharp turn, the betrayal, the lies, and the downfall. I hated that those memories still had power over me. I hated that she still occupied space in my head after everything. It made me wonder if I'd ever truly be free of it, if I could ever really move on without dragging that baggage into my future. Sophia noticed it too. She could tell when I'd start to pull away, when the ghosts of my past would take over. "You don't have to go through this alone," she told me one night after I'd been distant for a few days. "Whatever it is you're feeling, it's okay. Just don't shut me out." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't that I didn't want to let her in. I did. But letting her in meant confronting parts of myself I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The anger, the hurt, the fear that maybe I wasn't capable of being in a relationship anymore. That maybe, deep down, I was just as broken as Emily had left me. But I didn't want to be that guy anymore. I didn't want to be stuck in the past, constantly replaying the worst parts of my life like some kind of punishment. I knew if I kept living like that, I'd never find any real peace. I'd just keep circling back to the same mistakes, the same doubts, the same pain. So, I made a choice. I decided to face it, to deal with all the shit I'd been avoiding. I started seeing a therapist, something I'd always thought was for other people, not me. But I needed it. I needed someone to help me untangle the mess in my head, to make sense of the chaos. And slowly, session by session, I started to understand what had been holding me back. It wasn't just the betrayal that had screwed me up. It was the way I'd lost trust in myself. I'd ignored the signs with Emily, brushed off my own instincts because I didn't want to face the truth. I didn't want to believe that the person I loved could do something so awful. And now with Sophia, I was terrified of making the same mistake. Terrified of trusting someone again, only to end up in the same place, broken and bitter. But through therapy, I started to see things differently. I realized that trusting someone doesn't mean ignoring the risks. It means understanding that, yeah, things might go wrong, but that doesn't mean they will. It's about taking that leap even when you're scared. And more than that, it's about trusting myself. Trusting that I've learned from the past, that I won't ignore the signs again. It wasn't easy. Hell, it still isn't. There are days when I catch myself slipping, when those old fears come creeping back, whispering that maybe I'm not cut out for this, that maybe I'm destined to screw things up. But now, I know how to push through it. I know that those voices don't control me. I do. Sophia and I had a long conversation one night after I'd been feeling particularly off. I told her everything. How scared I was, how I didn't know if I could ever fully trust again. She didn't get upset or frustrated. She just listened the way she always does. And when I was done, she said something that stuck with me. We can figure this out together. It doesn't have to be perfect right away. We'll figure it out one step at a time. That's when I knew. I knew I wanted to try. I wanted to open my heart again, even if it scared me. Because at the end of the day, what's the alternative? Living in fear and bitterness? I'd done that long enough, and it nearly destroyed me. It wasn't just about Sophia, though. It was about me. I had to come to terms with my past, accept it for what it was, and let it go. I wasn't going to let Emily's actions define me anymore. I wasn't going to keep carrying that weight around like a badge of honor. I started making plans. Small ones at first, weekend trips with Sophia, talking about where we saw ourselves in a few years, what we wanted out of life. But it was more than that. It was the beginning of something new. A future that wasn't dictated by my past, but shaped by what I wanted, by who I wanted to be. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could be happy again. The thing about hitting rock bottom is that eventually there's nowhere to go but up. And after everything, Emily's betrayal, the divorce, the anger, the bitterness, I realized I'd finally reached that point where I was ready to climb back up. But this time, I wasn't doing it alone. I had Sophia, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could actually see a future. A real one. It wasn't some epiphany that hit me all at once. It was gradual, like waking up from a long, dark sleep. One day, I just knew. I was ready to move on, to stop letting the past define me. I was ready to start something new with her. Sophia wasn't just someone who helped me through the tough times. She'd become someone I wanted to build a life with. And that's a hell of a realization after everything I'd been through. We started talking more seriously about our future, laying it all out on the table. It wasn't easy at first, given all my hang-ups, but the more we talked, the more I realized we were on the same page. We both wanted the same things: stability, trust, happiness. But we didn't just talk about the abstract stuff. We got specific, where we wanted to live, how we saw ourselves growing, what we wanted from each other. It was refreshing having someone who was just as invested in building a future as I was. One night, after a long conversation about our dreams and goals, I made the final decision. I was ready to commit, not just to Sophia, but to the idea that I could be happy again, that I could have a life filled with hope instead of resentment. I told her as much, and the relief on her face was all I needed to know I was making the right choice. We were in this together now, and it felt damn good. I wanted to mark this new beginning in some way, something symbolic to officially close the chapter on my past. So I decided to organize a small dinner. Nothing fancy, just a gathering of close friends, a few people who had been there for me through it all. Tom, of course, was the first one I invited. Without him, I'm not sure I'd have made it this far. I owed him that much. At that dinner, I felt lighter than I had in years. We toasted to new beginnings, to letting go of the past, and to the future. For the first time, I wasn't just going through the motions. I actually believed it. I believed that I could leave everything that had happened with Emily behind and start fresh, with a clear mind and a full heart. It was cathartic in a way. Saying goodbye to that part of my life wasn't easy, but it was necessary. After the dinner, Sophia and I went for a walk. It had become our thing, walking through the park, just talking, no distractions. That night, it felt different. It felt final, like I was truly stepping into something new. We walked side by side, reminiscing about how we met, how far we'd come since then. I told her how much she meant to me, how she had helped me in ways she probably didn't even realize. And for the first time, I felt like I could actually breathe, like the weight of the past had finally lifted. As we walked, I looked over at her, and I knew this was it. This was the life I wanted, the person I wanted to be with. I wasn't holding on to the anger or the pain anymore. I wasn't letting the ghost of Emily haunt me. I'd finally found peace. At some point during the walk, Sophia took my hand, and we just kept going. No words, no need for them. We both knew what this moment meant. It was a quiet, simple kind of happiness, the kind I didn't think I'd ever have again. But here I was, walking through the park with the woman I cared about, looking forward instead of back. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt hopeful. I was ready to move forward, to embrace whatever came next, knowing that I wasn't alone. It was a new beginning, and for the first time in years, I could honestly say I was excited about the future. I swear I didn't go looking for anything that night. I just woke up. No reason, just one of those random wake-ups in the middle of the night. The bedroom was dark except for the soft glow of her phone screen on the nightstand. I wouldn't have even noticed it if it hadn't lit up right as I rolled over. Isabel's phone, unattended, unlocked. And there it was, a message. "I can't wait to see you, you're amazing." It wasn't from anyone I knew. Declan Miller, not a name that rang any bells. My heart sank, and a strange numbness crept over me. I sat up, trying to keep my breathing even. My first thought was maybe it was some harmless mistake, like spam or a wrong number. But the way my gut twisted told me otherwise. I should have put the phone down right then and there. But I couldn't. I tapped the message, and everything spilled out in front of me. Weeks of chat logs. Flirty messages, intimate pictures exchanged late at night. "Had such a good time last Thursday," one message read. That was the night Isabel told me she was working late. Another message referred to that beach trip. I remembered it perfectly. It was our daughter Lydia's 8th birthday weekend. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling deeper, my hands cold and clammy. She had spent that whole weekend acting normal. No, better than normal. I remembered her holding Lydia's hand as they walked along the shoreline, laughing at my terrible attempts at kite flying. She even pulled me in for a photo that day, planting a kiss on my cheek. But here, in these messages, she was talking about that same weekend as if it had been some secret getaway with him. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. My wife wasn't just texting some guy. She was sleeping with him. I could hear her slow, steady breathing next to me, completely unaware that I was unraveling right there in the dark. Every instinct screamed at me to wake her up, shove the phone in her face, demand answers. But I didn't. I forced myself to put the phone back exactly where it was and lay down, my heart hammering in my chest. "Stay calm, Caleb. Don't tip her off." When the alarm went off the next morning, I was already awake. I dragged myself out of bed, heading straight to the kitchen to make breakfast, just like I always did. Isabel strolled in a little later, looking refreshed, a sleepy smile on her face. She kissed me on the cheek like nothing had happened. "Morning, babe," she said cheerfully, pulling out plates from the cupboard. "Morning," I replied, my voice tighter than I'd intended. She didn't notice. Instead, she poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table with Lydia, who was excitedly telling her about some projects she was working on at school. I tried to focus on their conversation, but my mind was a storm of questions. Isabel looked so normal. How could she sit there, all smiles, chatting with our daughter after spending nights in another man's bed? She glanced at me, her expression relaxed and content, as if everything in our world was perfectly fine. For a split second, I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. But then the weight of the truth settled back over me like a stone tied to my chest. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, watching Isabel with new eyes. I noticed things I hadn't before, or maybe I'd just ignored them. She stayed late at work a lot. When she got home, she was quick to give me a peck on the lips and disappear into her phone. I'd asked her a few times why she seemed so distant, but she always had some excuse, just tired or work's been crazy. But now, with what I knew, it was clear I wasn't the problem. She had someone else. At one point during the day, I wandered out into the front yard. Martina Campbell, our neighbor, was watering her garden and waved me over. "Hey, Caleb, Isabel's been looking great lately. That new hair color really suits her." New hair color? I blinked, thrown off for a moment. Isabel hadn't mentioned getting her hair done. "Yeah, it does," I mumbled, playing along, but Martina's words made my skin crawl. It wasn't just the hair, it was everything. Her clothes had changed too. More form-fitting, more daring. I thought it was just her trying to feel good about herself again after having Lydia. But now, with everything I'd uncovered, it felt like I'd been living in some parallel version of our life. One where everything was the same on the surface, but underneath, things were rotten. I could have confronted her that night. Every time she glanced at her phone, I felt a sharp sting in my chest, wondering if it was him texting her. But something held me back. I needed more than just a gut feeling and a few texts. If I exploded on her now, she'd just lie and twist things around. I needed proof. So I played the waiting game. I didn't change my behavior, didn't treat her any differently, at least not in ways she'd notice. But every time she left her phone lying around, I'd sneak a quick look, gathering as much as I could. I also installed a tracking app, one of those hidden ones that mirrored her phone notifications to mine. Now, I would see everything she did in real time. That night, I lay beside her again, wide awake while she slept soundly next to me. Her hand rested lightly on my chest like it always did, and for a second, I felt a pang of something close to guilt. What if I was wrong? What if there was some explanation for all this? But then I remembered those messages, those goddamn photos of them together. The way he talked about her, like she was his. "No, Caleb, you're not crazy. She's the one betraying you." Still, it was surreal. Isabel had been my best friend, the woman I thought I'd grow old with. And now, every time I looked at her, all I saw was lies. Lydia's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked, her little brows furrowed with concern. I forced a smile. "Yes, sweetie, just thinking about stuff." She nodded, but the look in her eyes told me she knew something was off. And so the first cracks began to form, not just in my marriage, but in my whole life. I didn't confront her right away. Part of me wanted to throw the phone in her face, scream at her, and demand answers. But I knew how these things went. If I acted on impulse, she'd lie, twist things around, turn it back on me. No, I needed to be smart about this. I needed proof. So I waited. I played dumb. I kept my routine exactly the same. The night after I found the messages, I installed a hidden app on her phone. It was one of those discreet ones that mirrored all her texts and notifications to mine. Every time her phone buzzed, I got a notification too. It made me sick to my stomach, knowing that her next message could be from him. But I needed to see everything. I also checked our shared photo album and the GPS history on her phone, digging through every detail I could find. The pattern became obvious pretty quickly. Isabel had a habit of visiting Riverside, a neighborhood across town. There was no reason for her to be there. None that she'd ever mentioned anyway. I could only guess that's where Declan lived. Every time she was working late or out with friends, she ended up there. It was like living in someone else's nightmare. I'd sit at work, phone in hand, watching notifications roll in, pretending like everything was fine while my wife was out there with him. One time, when I saw she'd arrived in Riverside again, I clenched my phone so hard I thought it might shatter. The worst part wasn't the messages or the photos. It was how comfortable they were with each other. They talked about inside jokes, shared little stories from their days, things that she used to share with me. The emotional connection stung almost worse than the physical betrayal. Then came the night she said she was going to yoga with one of her friends. Isabel rarely went to yoga, and when she did, it was always on weekends. My gut told me something was off. "Yoga class tonight?" I asked casually, leaning against the kitchen counter as she packed her gym bag. "Yeah," she said without missing a beat. "It's been a while. Emma keeps bugging me to come with her." I gave her a nod and forced a smile. "Have fun." As soon as she left, I grabbed my keys and followed her. I stayed far enough behind that she wouldn't notice, if she even cared enough to look. Sure enough, she didn't go to any yoga studio. I followed her all the way to a small cafe tucked into the corner of Riverside. And there he was, Declan. She spotted him the moment she walked in, her whole face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in months. She slid into the booth across from him, and the two of them leaned in close, their legs brushing under the table. They were laughing, touching hands, acting like giddy teenagers sneaking out of class. She looked happy. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Watching them like that, it felt like someone had reached into my chest and crushed my heart. Seeing her with him, so at ease, so free, was worse than anything I could have imagined. I wanted to storm in, flip the table, and confront them both right there. But I didn't. I just sat there, paralyzed, watching them flirt and touch like it was the most natural thing in the world. When she finally left the cafe, she had a glow about her. The same glow she used to have when we first started dating. But now it wasn't for me. It was for him. That night, I lay beside her again, wide awake while she slept like nothing had happened. Her breathing was soft and steady, and her hand brushed against mine under the blanket. I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever be able to forgive her. Could I really move past this? Could I ever look at her the same way again? I didn't have an answer. Over the next few days, Isabel started picking up on my mood. I could see her eyes lingering on me longer, watching for any sign that something was off. I did my best to act normal, but it wasn't easy. I kept getting lost in my own thoughts, replaying every moment of our relationship in my head, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong. I spent more time at work, throwing myself into projects that didn't even matter. When I was home, I'd stay late in the garage, tinkering with tools I hadn't touched in years. "Everything okay, Caleb?" she asked one evening as I stood at the sink, scrubbing a dish that was already clean. "Yeah, just tired," I mumbled. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't push. "Not yet." Lydia was the only one brave enough to call me out on it. One night, as I tucked her in a bed, she looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes of hers. "Dad, why are you sad?" she asked, her little voice full of concern. I felt my throat tighten. "I'm not sad, sweetheart," I lied, brushing a hand over her hair. "Just thinking about grown-up stuff." She didn't look convinced, but she snuggled deeper into her blankets and let it go. Isabel, on the other hand, was getting suspicious. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out what was going on with me. She started asking more questions, trying to engage me in conversations that felt forced. She'd sit next to me on the couch, curling into my side, asking about my day like she gave a damn. It was like she was trying to feel me out, figure out if I knew anything. But I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. Instead, I distanced myself even further. I kept my answers short and vague, just enough to keep her from digging too deep. The less I said, the more uncomfortable she got. She knew something was up, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. And that was exactly what I wanted. The dynamic in our house shifted. Where once there had been laughter and easy conversations, there was now tension, thick and suffocating. Every interaction felt like a test, a game of chess where we both tried to outmaneuver each other without saying what we really meant. I spent more nights in the garage pretending to work on meaningless projects. Sometimes I'd just sit there, staring at the tools scattered across the workbench, thinking about how my life had turned into this mess. I used to love being home, love spending time with my family. Now it felt like a battleground, and every moment with Isabel was another reminder of how everything I thought we had was a lie. And yet, I still wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed more. I needed her to feel just as vulnerable as I did, to wonder what I knew and when I might finally explode. The waiting game was brutal, but it was the only way I could stay in control. She thought she had the upper hand, thought I was clueless. But the truth was, I was watching her every move, tracking her every step. And when the time came, I'd be ready. Exposing Isabel's affair wouldn't be enough. I could see that clearly now. I could catch her red-handed, throw every bit of evidence in her face, and watch her squirm. But what would that change? She'd be embarrassed, sure, but she wouldn't feel what I felt. She wouldn't know what it's like to be gutted from the inside out, watching the person you love turn their affection toward someone else. No, that wasn't enough. I needed her to feel everything I was feeling. I didn't plan on meeting Savannah Marlowe. It just happened. The bar was close to my office, and one night after a particularly shitty day, I stopped in, hoping a drink might dull some of the noise in my head. Savannah was working the bar, wiping down glasses with an easy smile that lit up her whole face. She looked young, mid-20s maybe, with dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail and tattoos peeking out from under her sleeves. "What'll it be?" she asked, glancing at me with a curious grin, like she knew I didn't belong there. "Bourbon," I muttered, sliding onto a stool. She poured my drink and set it down with a little more grace than I'd expected. "Rough day?" I just nodded. I wasn't in the mood to talk, but Savannah had a way of pulling words out of me without even trying. She didn't pry. She just talked about her day, the weird customer she'd dealt with, and how she was saving up to travel the country in a beat-up and she was fixing up with her brother. I found myself opening up, telling her little bits about my life, how work had been dragging, how things at home weren't great. I didn't mention Isabel. Not yet. I didn't need to. Savannah had this easy way about her that made it feel like none of that mattered in the moment. I went back to the bar the next night, and the night after that. Before long, stopping by for a drink became part of my routine. At first, I told myself it was innocent, just someone to talk to, someone who didn't know the mess my life had become. But with each visit, the flirting between us grew more obvious. Savannah would lean in closer when she spoke, her hand brushing mine as she passed me my drink. And I didn't pull away. She never asked too many questions, just let me be whoever I needed to be in that moment. When she laughed, it felt real, like she wasn't holding back for anyone. Being around her was a relief, like I could step out of my own skin for a little while and just breathe. One night, after a few drinks, she leaned on the bar, her eyes locking onto mine. "You know, I don't see guys like you in here very often." "Guys like me?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "You look like you've got your shit together," she said with a smirk. "But there's something else. Something heavy." I just shrugged, swirling the bourbon in my glass. "Life, I guess." She didn't press, just smiled, that easy smile of hers. "Well, here's to life." She clinked her glass against mine, and for a moment, the weight on my chest didn't feel quite as heavy. I wasn't stupid. I knew what I was doing. I wasn't just hanging out at the bar for the atmosphere. I wanted Isabel to find out. I wanted her to wonder what I was up to when I wasn't home, to feel that same creeping suspicion I'd lived with for months. It didn't take long for the rumors to start spreading. I started dropping hints to mutual friends, nothing obvious, just little comments here and there. "I've been spending time with someone new," I'd say casually, knowing the gossip would spread like wildfire. I didn't care who knew. In fact, the more people who knew, the better. One evening, I ran into Martina Campbell at the bar. She nearly dropped her drink when she saw me sitting there, chatting with Savannah like we were old friends. "Caleb," she asked, eyes wide with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" "Having a drink," I replied with a shrug, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Martina looked from me to Savannah and back again, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. "Does Isabel know you're here?" I gave her a smile, the kind that wasn't really a smile at all. "Why? You gonna tell her?" Martina blinked, clearly thrown off by my tone. This isn't like you, Caleb. People change," I said flatly, raising my glass to my lips. Martina huffed, crossing her arms. "She's your wife, Caleb." "Yeah, well, I'm sure Isabel's doing just fine without me," I said, my voice laced with bitterness. Martina stared at me for a moment, her expression shifting from shock to something more like pity. "I'm going to talk to her," she said finally, as if she thought she could fix whatever was happening between us. "Go ahead," I muttered, not bothering to stop her. "Let her talk. Let Isabel know exactly where I was, who I was with." Savannah raised an eyebrow as Martina stormed out of the bar, shaking her head. "Friend of yours?" "Something like that," I said, finishing my drink. Savannah didn't ask any more questions. She just smiled, and we went back to talking about nothing and everything like we always did. That night, as I drove home, a strange kind of satisfaction settled over me. It wasn't just about getting back at Isabel. It was about reclaiming a part of myself that I'd lost somewhere along the way. I didn't know where this thing with Savannah was going, and honestly, I didn't care. All I knew was that for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had some control. I wanted Isabel to feel the same gut-wrenching uncertainty I'd felt. I wanted her to wonder if I was thinking about someone else when I kissed her goodnight. And if Martina's reaction was anything to go by, I was well on my way to making that happen. The game had only just begun, and for the first time in months, I wasn't playing defense anymore. It happened sooner than I expected. One night, while I was at the bar with Savannah, enjoying the rare sensation of lightness, Isabel stormed in. I didn't see her coming. 1 second, Savannah and I were laughing over some silly joke, and the next, I heard Isabel's voice cut through the low hum of the bar like a blade. "So this is where you've been hiding." I looked up, and there she was, Isabel, standing in the entrance, scanning the room until her eyes locked on mine. Her face twisted in rage, lips pressed into a tight line. She marched toward us like a woman possessed, fury radiating off her. Every head in the bar turned as she approached. "Who the fuck is she?" Isabel demanded, pointing at Savannah with a wild look in her eyes. Her voice was loud, sharp, and bitter, impossible to ignore. Savannah froze, visibly uncomfortable, her carefree demeanor evaporating in an instant. She shot me a glance, clearly wondering what kind of mess she had just walked into. "Isabel, don't do this here," I said, keeping my voice even, though my heart was pounding in my chest. She wasn't having any of it. She stepped closer, glaring at Savannah. "You think this is funny? Flirting with a married man? You think that's cute?" Savannah raised her hands defensively and stood up. "I didn't know." "Bullshit," Isabel snapped, cutting her off. "Don't act like some innocent bystander." "Isabel," I warned, "back off." Isabel ignored me. She turned to the growing crowd of onlookers, her voice growing louder. "This asshole's been sneaking around behind my back, cheating on me with this tramp." I leaned back in my seat, arms crossed, forcing myself to stay calm. This was what she wanted, to make me react, to make me feel like I was the one at fault. "How does it feel?" I asked, keeping my eyes locked on hers. "How does it feel to be betrayed?" She faltered for a moment, taken off guard. For a second, I saw it, the guilt, the fear, before the mask slipped back into place. "You ruined this family, Caleb," she hissed, her voice low but venomous. I stood slowly, making sure to keep my movements deliberate. "No, Isabel," I said calmly. "You ruined it the moment you started fucking Declan." The bar went dead silent. Martina, who had been sitting at the other end of the bar, stared at us, wide-eyed. She looked like she was watching a slow-motion car crash and couldn't tear her eyes away. Isabel's face paled for just a second, but then she snarled, "That's different. He was just a distraction." Savannah, embarrassed and clearly wanting no part in this disaster, muttered, "I think I should go." She grabbed her things and slipped away, leaving me and Isabel standing in the center of the room, surrounded by people who were now witnessing the complete unraveling of our marriage. Isabel turned back to me, eyes wild. "You're a coward, Caleb. You sneak around and flirt with some bar girl to make yourself feel better? That's fucking pathetic." I smiled bitterly, not rising to her bait. "Is it? Or is it just karma?" When we got home, the argument exploded into full force. Isabel slammed the door behind her and spun around to face me. "You really think flirting with some bartender makes you a man?" she spat, her voice dripping with contempt. "You think this is how you solve our problems?" "No, Isabel," I said quietly. "But it sure as hell feels good to watch you squirm." She glared at me, her chest heaving. "Declan didn't mean anything. I was lonely, Caleb. You were never there for me." "Don't give me that crap," I shot back. "You chose to cheat. Don't try to twist it into something it's not." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel sorry for her. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the folder where I'd saved everything, and held it up. "You want to explain these? The photos? The messages? Or maybe the GPS pings showing every time you went to Riverside?" Her face crumbled as she realized there was no way out. She wasn't in control anymore. Her excuses, her lies, they all fell apart in an instant. "It was just a distraction," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Well, congrats," I said, my voice cold. "You distracted yourself out of a marriage." She sobbed, clinging to whatever shred of dignity she had left. "Kayla, please. I didn't mean for it to go this far. We can fix this. We can try again." But I was done. Whatever love I had for her had been eaten away by months of lies and betrayal. Martina showed up at the house the next day, hoping to mediate or talk some sense into me. She sat me down at the kitchen table, her expression full of concern. I know you're hurt, Caleb, but maybe there's still something worth saving. For Lydia's sake, if nothing else. I shook my head. I can't live like this, Martina. I can't wake up every day wondering if she's lying to me again. I won't do it. People make mistakes, Martina said softly. Isabel, she's just human. She made her choice, I replied, my voice firm. And I'm making mine. Martina sighed, realizing there was nothing more to say. I just hate to see things end like this. Trust me, I muttered. It ended the day. She decided to crawl into bed with someone else. Martina left not long after, leaving me alone in the silence of the house. Isabel was there somewhere, probably crying, probably coming up with new excuses or apologies. But none of it mattered anymore. The trust was gone, and once that's gone, there's no getting it back. There was a strange sense of clarity in knowing that. I knew it was time. There was no point dragging this out any longer. The lies, the betrayal, it had all hollowed out whatever love I had left for Isabel. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the same way. Now, I just felt exhausted, like I'd been running a marathon with no finish line in sight. But this dinner would be the end. I'd made up my mind. I would hand her the divorce papers, close the book on us, and finally be free. I booked a table at the restaurant where we had celebrated our first anniversary all those years ago. I didn't choose it for sentimental reasons. I chose it because it felt symbolic, a way to bring things full circle and finally lay them to rest. This marriage had been dead for a while now. It was just time to make it official. That evening, as I pulled on my jacket, Lydia stood in the doorway of my room, clutching one of her stuffed animals. Her big, curious eyes watched me closely, and I could see the questions swirling in her little head. "Dad," she said softly, hugging the stuffed bear tighter to her chest. "Do you and Mom still love each other?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I froze, my hands hovering over my collar. And for a second, I didn't know what to say. How do you explain something so complicated to an 8-year-old? I crouched down in front of her, brushing her hair out of her eyes. "Sweetheart," I whispered, "I will always love you. No matter what happens, you are the most important thing in the world to me." She frowned, clearly not satisfied with that answer. "But do you love Mom?" I hugged her tightly, trying to hold back the knot in my throat. "Sometimes," I said slowly, "grown-ups love each other in different ways. And sometimes, that love changes." Lydia didn't say anything, just rested her head on my shoulder. I held her for a moment longer, wishing I could shield her from the mess that her mother and I had made. "I love you," I whispered into her hair, and I meant it more than anything. That will never change. When I arrived at the restaurant, Isabel was already seated, sipping a glass of water. She smiled when she saw me, but it was strained, like she wasn't sure what kind of conversation we were about to have. I slid into the chair across from her, placing my bag carefully by my side. "Hi," she said cautiously, her eyes scanning my face. "You look nice." I nodded but didn't return the compliment. For a few minutes, we sat in awkward silence. Then, as if trying to bridge the distance between us, Isabel started talking, reminiscing about old times, about when things were good. She mentioned our honeymoon, the first house we bought, Lydia's birth. Moments that, once upon a time, had meant everything to me. But now, they felt like memories that belonged to someone else. I didn't respond much, just sipped my wine and nodded at the right moments. My mind was elsewhere, focused on the papers tucked neatly inside my bag. The longer Isabel talked, the more it became clear that she was desperately trying to hold on to something that was already gone. After a few more minutes of strained conversation, I decided I'd had enough. I reached into my bag, pulled out the divorce papers, and placed them on the table between us. Her smile faltered, and she stared at the papers like they were a bomb about to go off. "This evening doesn't mean anything to me anymore," I said coldly, looking her directly in the eye. Isabel's hand trembled as she reached for the papers. "Kayla, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Don't do this. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." I shook my head, my expression unchanging. "There's nothing left to fix." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel anything. No sympathy, no regret. Just emptiness. Please, she begged, her voice barely audible. We can try again. For Lydia. For us. I took the pen from my pocket, clicked it, and signed the papers right in front of her without hesitation. Then, I pushed them across the table and stood. It's over, Isabel, I said, my voice firm but emotionless. I can't live like this anymore. She sat there, stunned, her glass of wine half finished, her hands trembling as they hovered over the papers. For a moment, I thought she might say something else. One final plea, one last desperate attempt to change my mind. But she didn't. I turned and walked away without another word, leaving her sitting alone at the table. I didn't look back. I couldn't. In the hallway, just as I reached the exit, I ran into Martina. Her eyes widened when she saw me, and she gave me a look that was equal parts surprise and concern. Caleb, she said softly, you really went through with it? I nodded, my expression unreadable. Are you sure this is what you want? She asked, her voice gentle, as if she thought I might waver at the last second. For the first time in my life, I said quietly, I am absolutely sure. Martina studied my face for a moment, then gave me a sad smile. Well, I hope you find what you're looking for, she said softly. I didn't respond. I just gave her a small nod and walked out into the night, feeling lighter than I had in months. There was no satisfaction in it, no triumph, just closure. The chapter with Isabel was finally over. Packing my things wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. I'd imagined it might feel heavy, like I was ripping myself away from the life I'd built. But it didn't. It felt necessary, like shedding old skin. The house was too full of memories I didn't want anymore. Isabel's perfume clinging to the furniture, pictures from happier days scattered throughout the place, reminders of every broken promise. I stuffed clothes into bags, loaded a few boxes into the back of my car, and left without ceremony. I moved into a small apartment in the city center. It wasn't fancy, just a one-bedroom with creaky floors and a view of a laundromat, but it was mine. There was something comforting about starting over with nothing but the essentials. No ghosts lurking in the corners, no memories weighing me down. It felt clean. The hardest part was explaining it to Lydia. I promised her I wasn't going anywhere, that we'd still spend weekends together, and that she'd always be my #1 priority. She nodded solemnly, trying to be brave, but I could see the worry in her little face. It killed me that my decisions had hurt her, but I swore to myself that no matter what, I'd be there for her. I wouldn't let her feel abandoned. The weeks after the divorce passed in a strange blur. I focused on work, on making my new place feel like home, and on being the best dad I could be. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't pretending. Then, one rainy afternoon, I ran into Savannah. I was heading back to my apartment, groceries in hand, when I saw her across the street, holding an umbrella and wearing that same easy smile. Caleb, she called out, jogging over to meet me. I thought that was you. I couldn't help but grin. Hey, Savannah. We stood there for a moment, awkward but comfortable at the same time, rain tapping lightly against her umbrella. You look different, she said, tilting her head as she studied me. Different how? I asked. She shrugged. Lighter. Happier, maybe. I laughed, though it still felt strange to hear someone say that. Divorce will do that to you, I guess. Her eyes softened. I'm sorry about that. Don't be, I said, meaning it. It needed to happen. Savannah smiled, and for a moment, we just stood there in the drizzle, neither of us in a rush to leave. You want to grab a coffee? She asked, her tone casual but hopeful. Yeah, I said. I'd like that. Coffee turned into more coffee, and before I knew it, meeting Savannah became part of my routine again. It wasn't like before, though. This time, there were no games, no hidden motives. We just talked about life, about her van project, about anything and everything. She didn't press for details about Isabel, and I appreciated that. Being with her felt like a breath of fresh air, like I was finally allowed to move on without dragging the past behind me. One weekend, I had Lydia with me, and we ran into Savannah at the park. Lydia was shy at first, hiding behind my leg, but Savannah crouched down, smiling warmly. Hey, you must be Lydia, she said. Your dad's told me all about you. Lydia peeked out, curious but still wary. He has? Yup, Savannah said with a wink. He said you're the best artist around. That was all it took. Lydia's face lit up, and within minutes, the two of them were sitting together on a bench, talking about crayons and drawing contests. Watching them interact, I felt something settle in my chest, a sense of peace I hadn't known I was missing. Maybe this was what moving on looked like, not just for me, but for Lydia too. Of course, Isabel wasn't finished with me. A few weeks later, she called, asking if we could meet. I agreed, more out of curiosity than anything else. We sat across from each other at a cafe. The same tension between us that had defined the last few months of our marriage. She looked tired, like the weight of her mistakes had finally caught up with her. She began, struggling to find the right words. I want to say I'm sorry, Caleb. I know I hurt you, and I hate myself for it. I nodded but said nothing. I was lonely, she continued, her voice breaking. I wasn't thinking straight, but I never stopped loving you. Can we try again? For Lydia's sake? I leaned back in my chair, studying her. Part of me had wondered what this moment would feel like, if I'd feel vindicated or if some small part of me would still want her back. But as I looked at her, I realized I didn't feel any of that. I felt nothing. Thank you for the experience, I said calmly. I became stronger because of it. But you stayed in a place I no longer want to be. Her face crumpled, but I didn't waver. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was just done. When I got back to my apartment that evening, Savannah was waiting on the balcony, 2 beers in hand. She smiled as I stepped outside, the cool evening breeze brushing against my skin. How'd it go? She asked, handing me a beer. Exactly how it needed to, I said, sitting beside her. We sat there in comfortable silence, watching the lights of the city flicker on one by one. Savannah reached over and laced her fingers through mine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The past didn't matter anymore. It was behind me, right where it belonged. Just as I was about to take another sip of my beer, my phone buzzed. It was a video call from Lydia. Hey, sweetie. I answered, my voice warm. Dad, guess what? She said, welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The autumn wind howled across Maine's Crystal Lake, sending ripples across its usually tranquil surface. Earl Peterson guided his truck down the familiar gravel path leading to his family's lakeside estate, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. His father's call about the vintage Chris Craft boat had been brief and uncharacteristically tense, something that set off warning bells in Earl's mind. Thomas Peterson had maintained that boat with religious dedication for 3 decades. Dad, what's wrong with the boat? Earl had asked over the phone. Thomas's voice had wavered. Just come quickly, son. Please. That hesitation, that tremor in his father's usually steady voice, it wasn't right. Earl had learned to trust his instincts during his years in special operations, and right now, every nerve-ending screamed that something was terribly wrong. As he rounded the final bend in the driveway, the first red flag appeared. The property's security cameras, which he'd personally installed last spring, hung motionless. Their recording lights, which should have been blinking steady red, were dark. Earl slowed the truck, scanning the property with practiced precision. His heart nearly stopped when he spotted his wife Courtney's black Mercedes parked behind his parents' car. She told him she would be in Boston all week for a real estate conference. Earl had even helped her pack, listening to her enthusiastic chatter about networking opportunities and potential high-end property listings. Just think, darling, she'd said, kissing his cheek. This could be our big break into luxury real estate. Now her presence here, on a Wednesday afternoon when she should have been 2 states away, sent ice through his veins. Earl parked his truck out of sight, behind the old groundskeeper's shed. As he approached the house, his military training took over. Each step deliberate, his breathing controlled. The front door stood ajar, afternoon sunlight spilling across scattered papers in the entryway. Family photos lay face down on the hardwood floor, their frames cracked. Earl's hand instinctively reached for a weapon that wasn't there, his combat reflexes surging to the surface. From the direction of the boathouse came muffled voices. Earl moved silently across the lawn, years of tactical training guiding his movements. As he drew closer, his wife's voice carried clearly through the autumn air, cold, calculating, and utterly foreign to the woman he thought he'd married. "You two better clear your son's inheritance soon so I can divorce him and take a bigger cut." Courtney's words dripped with contempt. "After that, I'll retire rich, thanks to him. Don't you dare tell anything to your son, or my lover will make sure you won't be around much longer." Earl positioned himself near the boathouse window, his back pressed against the weathered wood. Through the slats, he could see his mother Lynn's tear-streaked face, her usually immaculate silver hair disheveled. Thomas sat beside her, cradling his right wrist, which was beginning to show signs of bruising. The sight of his father, a proud man who'd built their construction company from nothing, looking defeated, sent rage coursing through Earl's body. Standing beside Courtney was a hulking figure Earl didn't recognize, a muscular man with crude prison tattoos snaking up his neck. Later, Earl would learn this was Glenn Green, but in that moment, all he saw was a threat to his family. The man's stance and the slight bulge under his jacket suggested he was armed. What caught Earl's attention next made his blood boil. Around Courtney's neck gleamed his mother's sapphire necklace, a Peterson family heirloom passed down through 4 generations. Lynn had worn that necklace at Earl's wedding, promising to give it to his future daughter one day. "The money's not enough," Courtney was saying, her manicured fingers toying with the stolen necklace. "Maybe I should take this too. It's probably worth more than that pathetic boat your husband wastes so much time on." "That necklace belongs to my daughter." Lynn's voice shook with anger despite her fear. Glenn stepped forward, his shadow falling across Lynn. "You don't have a daughter, old lady. Just a son who married the wrong woman." His laugh was ugly, matching the cruel twist of his mouth. Thomas struggled to his feet. "You won't get away with this. Earl will." "Earl will what?" Courtney cut him off with a sneer. "Cry about it? Please. Your son's so blindly in love with me, he wouldn't believe you if you told him the sky was blue." She leaned closer to Thomas, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Now, where are the rest of the documents?" Earl's hand slipped into his pocket, activating his phone's recording feature. With his other hand, he sent a prearranged SOS signal to his old military teammate, James Rollins, now a detective with the state police. Years of friendship had taught them to trust such signals without question. Through the window, Earl could see the boathouse table clearly now. Half-empty coffee cups sat scattered across its surface, a faint white residue visible around their rims. The wall safe, hidden behind a vintage boating poster, gaped open, decades of family documents spread across the floor like fallen leaves. "The transfer papers need both our signatures," Thomas was saying, his voice stronger now. "And I won't sign anything under duress." Glenn's response was immediate and violent. He grabbed Lynn's arm roughly, yanking her to her feet. "Your choice, old man. Sign the papers, or your wife takes a swim in the lake." That was the moment Earl's restraint snapped. No one threatened his family. No one. He burst through the boathouse door, his presence announcing itself like a thunderclap in the enclosed space. "Let her go. Now." The look of shock on Courtney's face would have been almost comical under different circumstances. Glenn reacted instantly, shoving Lynn aside and reaching for his concealed weapon. But Earl was already moving, his military training taking over. The fight was swift and brutal. Glenn had prison yard tactics and raw strength, but Earl had years of special operations training. As Glenn drew his weapon, Earl grabbed a hammer from his father's toolbox, using it to disarm the larger man. The gun went flying, skittering across the floor and under a workbench. Glenn charged like a bull, but Earl sidestepped, using the man's momentum against him. The impact sent Glenn crashing into the boat repair equipment, tools clattering around him like metallic rainfall. "Earl, baby, this isn't what it looks like." Courtney's composed facade cracked, fear creeping into her voice. "Your parents, they're confused. They've been." "Shut up." Earl's voice was ice. "Just shut up." Courtney's fear transformed into something darker. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she snarled. "The Castellano family will." The sound of police sirens cut through the air, growing closer by the second. Earl kept his eyes on Glenn, who was struggling to his feet, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. Your parents deserve this, Courtney spat. All their wealth, wasted on that stupid boat and their precious family name. We just helped ourselves to what should have been yours anyway. The only thing I deserve, Earl replied calmly, is watching you both go to prison. The wail of police sirens grew louder, but Glenn wasn't finished. With surprising speed, he produced something from his jacket, a military-grade smoke grenade. The action revealed his own service background, a detail that would later prove crucial to the investigation. Now, Glenn shouted, pulling the pin. Thick smoke filled the boathouse within seconds. Earl heard his mother cough, his father calling out in confusion. Through the chaos, he caught a glimpse of Courtney and Glenn disappearing through a hidden route behind the boathouse, one that led directly into the dense Maine woods. "Dad, get Mom out," Earl commanded, trying to follow the escapees. But the smoke was too thick, and his priority had to be his family's safety. By the time the smoke cleared, Detective Megan Ruiz was leading a team of officers onto the property. Earl found his parents on the lawn, where emergency medical technicians were examining Thomas's injured wrist. They had this planned, Earl told Detective Ruiz, his arm around his shaking mother. The escape route, the smoke grenade. This wasn't amateur hour. Ruiz nodded, taking notes. "We'll find them, Mr. Peterson. But right now, I need you to tell me everything you know about your wife." As Earl began to speak, more details emerged. Courtney's true identity, Angela Martinez, a woman wanted in 3 states for elder fraud and marriage scams. Glenn's real name was Marcus Green, a dishonorably discharged Marine with documented connections to organized crime. The family's lawyer, Stephen Fry, arrived with suspicious speed, his BMW racing up the gravel drive before Earl had even called him. Unknown to the Petersons, he'd been working with Courtney for months, helping orchestrate their financial destruction. As police searched the property, evidence of a sophisticated criminal enterprise emerged. Forged documents lay hidden in the boat's storage compartments. Offshore account details were discovered tucked inside old maintenance logs. Most disturbing were the traces of substance found in the coffee cups, proof that Thomas and Lynn had been systematically gave them substance to make them more compliant. "Your father's signature on these documents," Detective Ruiz said, holding up a stack of papers and evidence bags. "They're good forgeries, but they're forgeries nonetheless. They've been working on this for months." Earl stood in the boathouse doorway, watching the sun set over Crystal Lake. The vintage Chris Craft boat bobbed gently at its mooring, a silent witness to the day's events. His mother's sapphire necklace was gone, along with decades of family history and trust, but Earl Peterson was far from defeated. "Detective," he said, turning to Ruiz, "I want to be involved in every step of this investigation." "That's not standard procedure," she began. "Neither is what happened here today." Earl's voice was firm. "They didn't just try to steal our money. They tried to destroy my family. This isn't over." As crime scene technicians combed the property and his parents gave their statements, Earl made a silent vow. Courtney, or Angela, or whatever her real name was, had chosen the wrong family to target. She thought she knew him, thought she had him figured out. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. The autumn wind continued to blow across Crystal Lake, carrying with it the promise of coming winter. But for Earl Peterson, it carried something else, the certainty that this was only the beginning. The mahogany-paneled study in the Peterson estate underwent a dramatic transformation in the week following the lake house incident. Earl methodically stripped the walls of their family photos, replacing generations of smiling faces with surveillance feeds and criminal network charts. The vintage sailing maps that Thomas had collected now served as backdrops for financial flow diagrams and suspected criminal connections. "Sir, FBI is here," announced Officer Chen, one of the local police officers assigned to guard the property. Earl looked up from the stack of financial records he'd been reviewing. Special Agent Benita Sullivan strode into the study, her dark suit and precise movements marking her as federal law enforcement before she even showed her credentials. Behind her came a team of specialists carrying cases of equipment. "Mr. Peterson," Sullivan said, extending her hand, "your case just landed on my desk. This goes far beyond a simple inheritance dispute." Earl gestured to the evidence boards he'd assembled. "I've been piecing things together. My wife, Angela Martinez, Sullivan interrupted, spreading photographs across Thomas's antique desk. Though that's just one of her aliases. Your wife isn't just a con artist, Mr. Peterson. She's the mastermind behind the Castellano family's elder fraud division. Earl leaned forward, studying the photos. They showed Courtney, no, Angela, at various high-end art galleries across New England. In each image, she wore a different designer outfit, but her predatory smile remained constant. Those art galleries she frequented? Sullivan continued. Money laundering fronts. The real estate conferences? Planning sessions for their next targets. We've been building a case against the Castellanos for years, but they're careful. Your wife's mistake was getting greedy with your family. A tall man in wire-rimmed glasses stepped forward, carrying a laptop. Howard Spence, Forensic Accounting. He introduced himself. We've been tracking financial patterns across the eastern seaboard. Each transaction, each art sale, leads back to the same network. Spence pulled up complex financial diagrams on his screen. See these transfers? High-end art pieces moving between galleries in Boston, New York, and Miami. Perfect for laundering money. The Castellanos were doing small-time elder fraud before your wife showed them how to steal entire family legacies. Earl studied the patterns, his military training helping him spot the tactical elements in their financial strategy. They move the money like they're moving troops, he observed. Creating diversions, false trails. Exactly. Sullivan nodded approvingly. Your background might be crucial in understanding their operation. At that moment, Detective Ruiz entered with fresh coffee for the team. Your parents are settled at the mountain cabin, she reported to Earl. Full security detail in place. Earl nodded, grateful for the update. His parents were recovering at a secure location, their testimony proving invaluable. Each day revealed more about the methodical nature of Courtney's operation. She'd prepared their coffee every morning, playing the dutiful daughter-in-law while lacing their drinks with a carefully measured cocktail of a legal substance. Glenn's presence wasn't just for muscle, Sullivan explained, pulling up his military record. Marcus Green, discharged for conduct unbecoming. He used psychological warfare techniques, subtle threats, implied violence. More effective than outright force for maintaining control. Earl remembered the bruise on his father's wrist, his mother's tear-streaked face. His jaw tightened. What's our next move? We build an airtight case, Sullivan declared. The Castellanos have connections in law enforcement, judiciary, even banking. We need overwhelming evidence. As if on cue, Howard Spence's laptop pinged. Another transfer just went through. They're moving art pieces again. A Monet this time. Valued at $2.3 million. Earl walked to the window, looking out at Crystal Lake. The vintage Chris Craft boat bobbed gently at its mooring, a reminder of everything his family had nearly lost. They think they've won, he said quietly. Let's prove them wrong. The arrival of Stephen Fry at FBI headquarters marked a turning point in the investigation. The family lawyer sat in an interrogation room, his expensive suit wrinkled, his usual confidence shattered. Faced with mounting evidence of his crimes, he began to crack. Start from the beginning, Agent Sullivan commanded, while Earl watched through the one-way glass. How did you get involved? Frey's hands trembled as he reached for the water glass before him. The Castellanos approached me 2 years ago. Small favors at first. Expediting some property transfers, backdating a few documents. The money was... He swallowed hard. The money was too good to resist. And Angela Martinez? Sullivan pressed. When did she enter the picture? She found me, Fry admitted. Knew about my work with the Castellanos. Said she had bigger plans. He leaned forward, voice dropping. The Castellanos owned 6 retirement homes across 3 states. Courtney, Angela. She'd identify wealthy targets, then create circumstances forcing them to move in. Once isolated, the families never stood a chance. Earl felt a hand on his shoulder. Travis Minor, his former team leader and now an FBI consultant, stood beside him. You okay? I trusted him, Earl said quietly. He handled my parents' estate planning for 20 years. Travis nodded grimly. That's how they operate. They don't just steal money. They steal trust. Inside the interrogation room, Fry continued his confession. Judge Jeffrey Matthews was key. He approved all the fraudulent property transfers through his court. The bank managers, they're all in on it too. They facilitate the movement of stolen funds. Take their cut. Sullivan spread photos across the table, surveillance shots of Glenn at various locations. Tell us about Green's role. He's their enforcer, Fry explained. Ex-military, like you suspected. That smoke grenade from the lake house? Military grade, stolen from Camp Lejeune. They've got connections to arms trafficking too. Earl's military training proved crucial in analyzing these tactical elements. Working with Travis, he began mapping Glenn's patterns. The escape route at the lake house, Earl pointed out. The smoke grenade deployment. These aren't random actions. No, Travis agreed. This is military protocol, adapted for criminal use. Look at the timing of their movements, the coordination. They've got training. Sullivan joined them in the observation room, her expression grave. We just uncovered something disturbing. The Castellanos have hired a contract killer, Ronald Chavez. His target? She met Earl's eyes. You. Earl absorbed this information without flinching. Why haven't they moved yet? Because of your behavior, Sullivan explained. They're waiting for you to self-destruct. Our surveillance shows they're monitoring you, expecting the betrayed husband routine. It's buying us time. Then let's give them what they expect, Earl said, a plan forming in his mind. As Winter's grip tightened around Crystal Lake, Earl Peterson began his carefully orchestrated downward spiral. He made sure he was seen at local bars, playing the part of a broken man perfectly. My wife, he slurred one night at the Rusty Anchor, loud enough for the Castellano surveillance team at the corner table to hear. Everything was a lie. Everything. The performance convinced crime family observers that he posed no threat. Reports filtered back to Courtney and Glenn in Montreal, where Agent Sullivan's team tracked their movements and monitored their communications with the Castellanos. He's falling apart. Courtney's voice came through on an intercepted call, just like I said he would. Pathetic. Earl's apparent collapse was a masterpiece of deception. Even as he staged public meltdowns, he worked tirelessly with the FBI task force. Each drunken rant was followed by hours of strategic planning in the command center. The breakthrough came when Thomas and Lynn, now clear-headed and determined, returned to the lake house. Under FBI supervision, they reached out to Stephen Fry, appearing to seek reconciliation. Mr. Fry, Thomas said during a recorded meeting, his voice heavy with fabricated defeat. We've been thinking about what Courtney said. Maybe it's time to simplify our estate. Fry, now working as an informant, passed the information up the chain. The Peterson parents, apparently broken by their son's decline, were ready to sign over everything. Earl's team crafted their lure with precision. They leaked information about a hidden Peterson family trust, supposedly untouched by the previous attempts at theft. The vintage Chris Craft boat, still waiting in the boathouse, would play a crucial role. The boat's restoration required importing rare parts from Europe, Earl explained to Sullivan as they reviewed the plan. Perfect cover for moving money across borders. And you're sure they'll bite? Sullivan asked. Earl smiled grimly. Courtney always said that boat was my father's biggest waste of money. She won't be able to resist using it against us. As Christmas decorations began appearing along Crystal Lake shore, surveillance teams tracked Courtney and Glenn crossing back over the Canadian border. The Castellanos, convinced of their prey's vulnerability, authorized one final operation to seize the Peterson estate. Every phone call, every text message, every email flowed through FBI monitoring systems. From his command center in the study, Earl watched the pieces fall into place. Agent Sullivan stood beside him, both of them watching their targets move into position on multiple screens. You realize this will determine more than just your family's fate, Sullivan said quietly. If we can break the Castellanos' elder fraud operation, we save countless other families, Earl finished. I know. Outside, snow began to fall on Crystal Lake. The vintage boat waited in its boathouse like a silent witness, ready to play its part in the coming storm. Earl Peterson, the man Courtney had dismissed as a lovesick fool, stood ready to spring the trap that would bring down an entire criminal empire. The final act was about to begin, and this time, Earl Peterson would be the one writing the ending. Heavy snow blanketed Crystal Lake on Christmas Eve, transforming the Peterson estate into a winter fortress. The security cameras, now fully operational but carefully disguised as malfunctioning, recorded every detail as a black SUV crept up the driveway at 11:47 p.m. Inside the FBI command van parked half a mile away, Earl Peterson watched Courtney and Glenn's approach on multiple monitors. "They really think you're passed out drunk in Portland," Agent Sullivan observed, adjusting her tactical vest. The FBI had orchestrated every detail, including Earl's very public breakdown at a Portland bar earlier that evening, actually performed by an undercover agent, while the real Earl prepared for the operation. "Courtney always did underestimate me," Earl replied, his voice cold. "She thought I was just some lovesick fool she could manipulate." Through the surveillance feeds, they watched Glenn approach the front door. His prison tattoos stood out starkly against the falling snow as he worked on the new lock, exactly the one the FBI had installed, knowing his preferred picking methods. Inside the lake house, Thomas and Lynn sat at their kitchen table, appearing vulnerable but wired with state-of-the-art surveillance equipment. Thomas's hands shook slightly as he arranged the financial documents, a performance for the cameras he knew were watching. "Remember," Earl's voice came through their hidden earpieces, "let them think they have the upper hand. The more comfortable they feel, the more they'll reveal." The front door swung open. Glenn entered first, his boots tracking slush across the floor. Courtney followed, dressed in an expensive designer coat that probably came from some other family's stolen fortune. Her stiletto boots clicked against the hardwood as she surveyed the room with predatory satisfaction. "You should thank us," Courtney said, her smile cold as she regarded the elderly couple. "Earl's drinking himself to death in Portland. We're here to protect your interests." She nodded to Glenn, who produced a thick stack of documents from his jacket. Lynn flinched convincingly at Glenn's approach, not entirely an act, given their last encounter. We didn't expect anyone tonight," she stammered. "That's the point, isn't it?" Courtney laughed, helping herself to Thomas's prize scotch without asking. "The best gifts are always surprises. Consider this our Christmas present to you. We're going to help you clean up the mess your son made of everything." From the command van, Earl watched his former wife pour herself a drink like she owned the place. Agent Sullivan touched his arm lightly. "She's getting comfortable. That's exactly what we want." The tactical teams were already in position. One group waited in the vintage Chris Craft boat, while others were concealed in the surrounding woods. Every room in the house had been wired for sound and video, creating an inescapable web of surveillance. Glenn prowled the room restlessly, his instincts clearly troubled by something he couldn't quite identify. "We should do this quick," he muttered to Courtney. "Something doesn't feel right." "Relax," Courtney snapped, settling into Thomas's favorite chair. "Look at them. They're terrified." "And Earl?" She laughed again, the sound like breaking glass. "He couldn't even figure out I was using a legal substance on his parents' coffee for months. Trust me, everything's under control." The next hour proved to be a masterclass in hubris. Courtney, believing she faced only two defeated seniors, began to revel in her moment of triumph. The hidden cameras captured every word as she detailed her operation with smug satisfaction. "You know what your real problem was?" she asked, swirling the scotch in her glass. "You were too trusting, too wrapped up in your precious family name and traditions. The Castellanos used to think small nursing home scams, insurance fraud. I showed them how to steal entire family legacies." Thomas leaned forward, playing his role perfectly. How many others?" "Oh, dozens," Courtney preened. "The art galleries were brilliant, if I do say so myself. Who looks twice at a $1 million painting changing hands? Money laundering at its finest. And the retirement homes? Perfect hunting grounds. Rich old people, all lined up like dominoes." Glenn's unease grew as Courtney talked. He kept glancing at the windows, the tactical training he'd corrupted now warning him something was off. But Courtney was too caught up in her moment of glory to notice. "Your son actually did me a favor," she continued, pulling out her phone. "His pathetic drinking made this so much easier. I just need to call Judge Matthews about expediting these final transfers." Her eyes fell on the vintage boat's restoration paperwork, carefully placed on Thomas's desk. The documentation suggested an insurance value 3 times the boat's actual worth, perfect for money laundering. As Courtney reached for the papers, a familiar voice cut through the room. "Federal agents insist on proper documentation," Earl said calmly, stepping out from the study doorway. "Especially for international transactions." Glenn's reaction was instant and violent. He reached for his weapon, but FBI teams were already swarming in from every entrance. Earl's former military unit, now FBI tactical operators, had him surrounded before his hand could close on the grip. Agent Sullivan personally approached Courtney, whose composure had finally shattered. "Angela Martinez," she announced formally, "you are under arrest for fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and multiple counts of elder abuse." Across 3 states, synchronized raids began. Judge Matthews was taken into custody during his Christmas Eve dinner, the turkey still steaming on his dining room table. The Castellano family leadership found their holiday gathering interrupted by tactical teams. Retirement home administrators, corrupt bankers, and art gallery owners all received similar Christmas Eve surprises. In the lake house, Courtney made one final attempt at control. "You can't prove anything," she snarled at Earl. "It's our word against 2 senile old people." Agent Sullivan smiled, producing a tablet displaying multiple video feeds. "Actually, we have your entire confession from tonight, plus evidence from every property transfer, art sale, and retirement home scheme for the past 5 years." Mr. Fry was quite thorough in his documentation. The evidence was overwhelming. Years of recorded conversations and transactions, detailed financial records from phrase files, testimony from dozens of victims, international banking records, documented connections to organized crime, proof of judicial corruption, medical records showing systematic illegal substance of victims. Earl stepped closer to Courtney as agents cuffed her. "You thought I was weak," he said quietly, "that I'd fall apart without you. But you never really knew me at all." "This isn't over," Courtney spat, but her voice trembled. "Actually," Earl replied, "it is." The following Christmas transformed Crystal Lake into a symbol of justice and healing. The Peterson estate hosted a gathering of families, all victims of the Castellano organization who had reclaimed their stolen legacies. The vintage Chris Craft boat, fully restored, bobbed gently at its dock. Earl and Agent Sullivan, their relationship forged in the crucible of justice, announced their engagement during the gathering. Their connection had grown naturally from mutual respect and shared determination, nothing like the manipulation that had characterized Earl's first marriage. Thomas and Lynn, fully recovered from their ordeal, had established a foundation to protect elderly citizens from financial exploitation. The family's construction business thrived under Earl's leadership, now specializing in security systems for senior communities. In federal prison, Courtney began serving her 30-year sentence, her designer clothes exchanged for prison orange. Glenn's cooperation with authorities earned him 15 years in a separate facility. The Castellano organization's leadership faced life terms, while Judge Matthews wrote his memoirs from a minimum security compound. The Peterson family story became a catalyst for legal reform, leading to strengthened protections for elderly citizens and harsher penalties for inheritance fraud. The art galleries were transformed into legitimate businesses under new ownership, while the corrupted retirement homes found new, ethical management. Earl kept the recordings from that Christmas Eve, not out of vindictiveness but as a reminder. The leather portfolio still sat in his father's study, now containing documentation of their victory rather than their victimization. The lake house stood proud against the Maine winter, its security cameras bright and functional, protecting a family that had turned victimization into victory. On quiet evenings, Earl and Benita Sullivan took the Chris Craft out on Crystal Lake, its restored engine purring across waters that had witnessed both betrayal and redemption. The boat, like the Peterson family, had emerged stronger from its trial by fire, a testament to the power of justice served cold on a winter's night. "What do you think about a spring wedding?" Benita asked one evening as they watched the sunset from the boat's deck. "Here by the lake?" Earl smiled, thinking of everything the waters had seen. "Perfect," he said. "This place has seen enough darkness. Time for some light." The vintage Chris Craft carried them back to shore, its wake spreading across Crystal Lake like ripples of justice. Steady, unstoppable, and finally complete. Epilogue. 5 years later. The federal maximum security facility in Colorado stood stark against the mountain backdrop as Earl Peterson walked through multiple security checkpoints. 5 years had transformed him. His military bearing remained, but success and vindication had added confidence to his stride. Prisoner 24601 is ready, the guard announced. Courtney Martinez, formerly known as Angela Martinez and Courtney Peterson, sat shackled to the interview table. Prison had stripped away her designer facade. Her once immaculate hair was streaked with gray, her manicured hands now rough from mandatory labor. "Come to gloat?" she asked, but the old venom had drained from her voice. "No," Earl replied, setting down a thick folder. "I'm here because 3 more of your previous victims came forward. The FBI needs to verify some details." Courtney's shoulders slumped. Her empire had crumbled completely in the years since her arrest. Each month seemed to bring new victims forward, each revelation extending her sentence. The 30-year term had grown to life without parole as evidence of more crimes emerged. "How's Glenn?" she asked, attempting sarcasm. "Still enjoying his deal?" Marcus Green committed suicide in his cell last year, Earl informed her dispassionately. His conscience finally caught up with him. Before he died, he provided evidence about 7 more families you targeted. Did you really think we wouldn't find them all eventually? The news of Glenn's death seemed to age Courtney another decade in moments. Her last ally was gone. The Castellano organization had disowned her, her illegal fortune was confiscated, and her web of lies had unraveled completely. Justice blooms. Back at Crystal Lake, the Peterson estate had become a symbol of resilience and redemption. The lakeside property now housed the Peterson Foundation for Elder Justice, a nationally recognized organization dedicated to preventing financial exploitation of seniors. Thomas and Lynn Peterson had transformed their trauma into purpose. "Another group today?" Earl asked his mother as he arrived home. Lynn, her silver hair now a crown of dignity, was arranging chairs in the converted boathouse conference room. "Financial advisors from across New England," she confirmed. "Your father's giving his presentation on spotting fraud indicators. 5 years later, and they still want to hear our story." The foundation had helped recover over $100 million in stolen assets for elderly victims nationwide. Thomas Peterson's experience had made him an expert at detecting financial exploitation schemes. His presentations to law enforcement and financial institutions had become legendary in the industry. The vintage Chris Craft boat, still gleaming at its dock, had become part of the Foundation's logo, a symbol of preservation and justice. Earl and Benita Sullivan Peterson used it regularly, taking their 3-year-old twins Emma and James for sunset cruises. Ripples of change. The case's impact had rippled far beyond Maine. Judge Jeffrey Matthews, serving 20 years in minimum security, had become a cooperating witness in judicial corruption cases across the country. His detailed testimony had led to the removal of 12 corrupt judges and the overturning of hundreds of fraudulent property transfers. Stephen Fry, after serving 3 years and providing extensive cooperation, had been released and now worked as a consultant for the FBI's Elder Fraud Division. His insider knowledge proved invaluable in dismantling similar schemes nationwide. The corrupted retirement homes had been completely reformed under new management, with the Peterson Foundation providing oversight. The art galleries, once fronts for money laundering, now operated legitimately, with several hosting exhibitions of art created by fraud survivors as therapy. Detective Megan Ruiz had been promoted to lead a specialized elder fraud task force, often collaborating with the Peterson Foundation. James Rollins, Earl's former military teammate who received his initial SOS, had joined the Foundation's security division, training law enforcement in protective tactics for vulnerable seniors. A new chapter. Earl's construction company had evolved into Peterson Security Solutions, specializing in protecting senior communities and financial institutions. The technologies they developed had become industry standards, implemented in retirement facilities across the country. Benita Sullivan Peterson now headed the FBI's New England White-Collar Crime Division, her experience with the Peterson case informing her approach to complex fraud investigations. Their marriage had become a partnership in justice, their shared dedication to protecting others strengthening their bond. The twins, Emma and James, were growing up surrounded by the legacy of their family's triumph over betrayal. The lake house's security cameras still functioned perfectly, but they now watched over family gatherings and foundation events rather than criminal conspiracies. The final ledger. During her years in prison, Courtney had received multiple offers for book and movie deals about her crimes. She had accepted none, her silence a final punishment, as she watched the Peterson family's story of resilience inspire others through authorized documentaries and educational programs. The Castellano crime family had never recovered from the scandal. Their leadership died in prison, their criminal empire dismantled, their ill-gotten assets redistributed to victims. The investigation sparked by the Peterson case had led to the collapse of similar operations in 3 countries. The leather portfolio in Earl's study, once containing evidence of victimization, now held thank-you letters from families they had helped, photographs of reunited relatives, and documentation of lives rebuilt. The Foundation's annual Christmas gathering had become a celebration of healing, with hundreds of survivors sharing stories of recovery and renewal. Legacy of Crystal Lake. 10 years to the day after Courtney's arrest, Earl stood at the lake's edge with his children. Emma, already showing her mother's investigative mind, asked about the story behind the boat's name. Justice Wake? Sometimes, Earl explained. Watching the sunset paint Crystal Lake in shades of victory, bad things happen to good people. But what matters is how we respond. This boat, this lake, this family, we chose to fight back. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone who needed protection. The Peterson estate had become more than a home or foundation headquarters. It stood as a beacon of hope, proving that justice, while sometimes slow, was unstoppable when pursued with determination and integrity. Inside the house, Benita prepared for another foundation board meeting. Thomas and Lynn played with their grandchildren in the restored boathouse. The security cameras blinked steadily, their red lights now symbols of protection rather than intrusion. Crystal Lake's waters lapped gently at the shore, carrying decades of stories, of betrayal transformed into triumph, of victims becoming protectors, of a family that refused to be broken. The vintage Chris Craft boat bobbed at its mooring, its wake long since settled but its impact eternally rippling outward, touching lives far beyond the shores of a lake in Maine. As dusk settled over Crystal Lake, Earl gathered his family for their evening boat ride. The tradition had begun as therapy but had become a celebration. Each voyage reminded them that while evil might make waves, justice created lasting currents that changed the very course of rivers. The Peterson legacy, forged in betrayal but tempered by justice, had become a foundation for others to build upon. In the end, Courtney's attempt to destroy the family had instead created an indestructible force for good, proof that sometimes the greatest victories come from the battles we never chose to fight, but refused to lose. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
My wife cheated, got pregnant, and didn't know I knew about the affair. Now she wants open marriage. I stumbled onto the patio armed with a club. Those pesky dogs were rummaging through my trash again, knocking over the dumpster and waking me up. It was the 3rd time this week, and I'd had enough. Why couldn't people keep their dogs at home? Though I knew they were just hungry, my annoyance lingered. Quietly unlatching the back gate, I approached the trash bins to confront them. 2 figures stood beside the toppled container. As I swung the gate open, they spotted me, pleading for mercy, explaining they were just hungry kids. Surprised, I brought them into the backyard under the security lights. They were ragged and dirty, dressed in oversized clothes and baseball caps, shivering in the chilly air. Demanding if they had tipped over my trash, one confessed, promising they wouldn't do it again. Not satisfied, I led them inside, directing them to the bathroom and instructing them not to come out until I said so. Gathering some clean clothes and towels, I returned to find them attempting to escape through the window. Surprised to realize they were girls, I urged them into the shower, providing soap and shampoo. After a brief exchange, I left them to clean up and headed to the kitchen. Sorting through the fridge, I prepared plates of cold fried chicken, potato salad, veggies with sauce, pastrami sandwiches, pickles, and chips. Setting the table for their meal would make for a pretty good dinner, I mused. I hoped they'd enjoy the monster cheese, mayo, and mustard on their sandwiches. The bathroom door opened quietly, and a whisper drifted to the kitchen. A minute later, 2 of the most stunning girls I'd ever seen entered, with long dark black hair, olive skin, And the greenest eyes, slightly almond-shaped, high cheekbones, and the cutest little noses. They were a sight to behold. They seemed to be in their teens, maybe 11 or 12. It was amusing to see them in Brianna's clothes. She's tall and they were tiny, with sleeves and trouser legs rolled up. They resembled tramps. "Take a seat," I offered. "Want cola, juice, milk?" They both opted for milk. "I'm McKay North," I introduced myself, pouring the milk. "Who are you?" "I'm Maggie," said the taller one. "Short for Margaret. This is Stokely. Can we really finish it all?" "Have more if you want," I said. "I'll cook in the morning, but not at 2 a.m. "No, that's fine, thanks," Stokely replied. Maggie eyed me suspiciously. "What do you want from us? We're not up to anything." I chuckled. "Same here. If you're after my virtue, you'll be disappointed." They didn't quite grasp my humor. "I'm not interested in little girls," I clarified. They weren't fans of the label, but they started eating voraciously. "Slow down," I advised. "Chickens, no need to bolt. The chickens are dead, and the potatoes were never fast runners. You'll get a stomachache." They chuckled, eating more moderately. "Where do you live?" "There's an empty house down the block," Maggie explained. "We found a mattress and something to cover up with, but we're worried about hopheads moving in once they realize it's vacant." "Want a warm bed tonight?" I offered. They eyed me skeptically. "Not mine," I clarified. "I've got 3 spare bedrooms, well, technically mine too, but you get the idea." They chuckled nervously. "We've got no money," Stokely admitted. "We can't pay." "I'm not asking for payment," I reassured. "Why are you doing this?" she queried. "Why be so kind?" "Mac, call me Mac," I corrected. "Everyone does." "I'm just a good guy, not trying to be cute," I explained. "Ask my mom." This brought smiles. I liked it. I decided to make it a regular thing. "I'd want someone to be kind to me if I were in your shoes," I mentioned. They seemed to mull it over. "Can I snag some of these chips?" Stokely inquired. I passed her the bag and they both reached in while munching on their sandwiches. I finished mine and they seemed eager for more. I poured another glass of milk for each of them and they drank it down. I was amazed as they cleared off their plates and devoured all the vegetables down to the last crumb. They must have been famished. "Time for bed," I informed them. "You each have your own bathroom. Toothbrushes, combs, and such are in there. There's aspirin, stomach medicine, toothpaste, and floss in the first aid kits. If you need anything else, just ask." "Can we lock the doors?" Maggie asked. "Sure, but if I need you to, you'll have to unlock them promptly," I explained. They eyed me oddly, a realization dawning in Maggie's vivid green eyes. "He's worried we'll swipe something," she explained to her sister. "We won't, Mac. It's okay if you don't fully trust us. We're not entirely trusting you either." I chuckled. Fair enough. Mutual distrust it is. "Soon enough, you'll find you can trust me." "I hardly ever injure pretty girls," I quipped, eliciting another pair of radiant smiles. I think they appreciated the pretty part. They followed me to their rooms and I heard the locks click as I returned to bed. I lay awake for a while, pondering what led these girls to this situation. Why were they rummaging through my trash? Why were they alone? Where was their family? I resolved to get some answers in the morning. As I dressed, I heard the floor creaking in the hallway. Opening the door a crack, I spotted them creeping into the living room. Thinking they might be planning to leave, I opened the door wider. "Girls, ready for breakfast?" I asked. They exchanged glances. "Maybe we should just go," Maggie suggested. "You're not going to lock us up or anything, are you?" "You mean make you stay?" I clarified. They glanced at each other again, then back at me, nodding. "No, I won't force you to do anything," I assured. "It's against my principles to compel anyone, but I'd like you to join me for breakfast." They exchanged another look. "Will you let us leave after?" Stokely asked. "If that's what you want," I replied. "Actually, I was hoping you'd spend the day with me, but if you have somewhere else to be, that's fine." "Yeah, we have to meet our stockbroker," Maggie grinned, her eyes lighting up. "What are you making us?" "Actually, what are you making us?" "Are you an English teacher or something?" Maggie teased. "As a matter of fact, yes," I confirmed. "I teach English Lit at the university." "Cool," Stokely remarked. "We don't go to school, too busy." "But you're having breakfast now, aren't you?" I pointed out. "I was thinking waffles with bacon. Do you like that?" They did, so we headed in, and they fetched the waffle iron while I prepared the batter. They made the waffles while I fried up 2 lbs of bacon. I'm a bit of a syrup snob. "And I'm a coffee snob," Maggie added. I had Maggie take charge of the bacon while I ground the coffee beans and fired up the coffee maker. It all came together quite nicely, and we enjoyed real maple syrup with our waffles. They irked me by asking for coffee creamer. "I'm saving some for the barbarians and Brianna who loved the vanilla cake," I quipped. We devoured all the bacon, and they each polished off 3 waffles. "Stick with me, girls, and in a week, you'll be as plump as toads," I joked. They both chuckled, and it was the most delightful sound. Then they guzzled down their milk like hungry calves. My pantry definitely needed restocking. "So, tell me about Maggie and Stokely," I prompted. "What's your story? Why resort to digging through trash for food?" We took our coffee into the living room, and they shared a heartbreaking tale. Their father, once a car mechanic, sank into hard drinks and misused post-unemployment, leaving their lives when they were young. Their mother divorced him, and they lost contact. In a battered Detroit economy, job prospects were slim. Their mother drove a cab, but tragedy struck when she picked up a passenger who fatally stabbed her for her meager earnings. Left to die, they ended up in foster care, enduring molestation from the homeowner before fleeing to live on the streets for 3 months. With the surname Steele, they feared the elements, violence, and hunger, struggling to survive day by day. As they recounted their ordeal, I sat in silence, heart heavy with empathy. How many others faced similar fates? It dawned on me that this was a more prevalent struggle than I'd realized. Could I help them? The idea seemed daunting, as a single man taking in 2 young girls might raise eyebrows and bureaucratic hurdles. They interrupted my thoughts. "Mac, are you married?" Stokely inquired. "I was," I admitted. My ex thought I lacked ambition. She's a high-flying lawyer, worldly and all. Marriage didn't fit into her picture. "What an idiot." Maggie chimed in. I chuckled. "She's actually a good person, no cheating or anything. We're still close friends." We both realized we were too young and naive. "How old are you?" Stokely asked. "I'm 28, I replied. "And you?" "I'm 11 and she's 13, Stokely responded. "What's on the agenda today?" "Well, we're going to chat," I started, "and I'll introduce you to someone." Opening the garage door, a furry blur dashed in. Spotting our guests, he bounded over, leaping onto the sofa and nuzzling into their laps, his big pink tongue lavishing affection. "Meet Granville," I introduced. I affectionately call him Grandma. They erupted into fits of giggles as he showered them with licks. Weighing in at about 130 lbs, he was immovable. I'm certain he outweighed them both. "Lie down, Grandma," I commanded, and he reluctantly obeyed, sprawling across their laps. "He's massive." Stokely chuckled, running her hand over his head. "What kind of dog is he? He looks like a striped tiger." "He's a bull mastiff," I explained. "The pattern is called brindle, which gives him that color." "He looks like he could snap our faces off," Maggie observed. "Yeah, he could, but he won't. He's friendly with my pals. He sees you chilling in our house, being friendly, and that's why he adores you. If you were hostile towards me, he'd be on high alert and very defensive. Now that he knows you, he won't tolerate anyone being hostile towards you. If I raise my voice at you, he won't like it. He cares deeply for those he loves." Stokely hopped down and draped herself over him, embracing his neck as he licked her hand. "I adore him," she declared. "He's so wrinkly and cute." "Does he stay in the garage?" "No, he's an indoor dog," I clarified. "Yesterday he got sick, so I put him outside to avoid making a mess in the house." "Why was he sick?" Stokely inquired. "He eats things he shouldn't, like sticks, bugs, and who knows what else. But he seems fine now." "Gross," Maggie remarked. He licked my face. "Yeah, he's adorable," I admitted. "He's my buddy, so I just deal with it. And he'll be your buddy too if you let him." "We should take him for a walk," Maggie insisted. I grabbed his leash and Maggie took the lead, but it's more like he leads whoever's holding the leash, so she stayed a few yards ahead of Stokely and me. Getting dragged along. Stokely slipped her little hand into mine. I glanced down at her and she smiled up at me. Man, she was beautiful, I thought. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Absolutely, sweetheart," I assured her. "I enjoy holding hands with pretty girls." She blushed faintly but didn't let go. We walked for a couple of miles, and by the time we returned, Grandma was panting and drooling. Despite the cold, he soldiered on. We sipped more coffee and chatted all day. Finally, I broached the subject of helping them. "What can you do?" Maggie inquired skeptically. "Honestly, Maggie, I'm not entirely sure," I admitted. I mentioned I could speak to Brianna. She's a lawyer of a different kind. Maybe she'll have some ideas. "Is this the same woman?" Maggie asked. "Maggie, she's not that," I corrected. "Stop calling her that. Do you trust me?" They glanced at each other before nodding. "Yeah, I guess," Stokely replied. "You've been really nice to us." "Well, let's give her a call and see if she can make it," I suggested. "You'll like her, just give her a chance." Brianna, busy but agreeable, joined us for dinner. Bree, a tall, stunning redhead, she's gorgeous, but she's never realized it. I described her, and I could see the girls were impressed when she arrived. She greeted me with a passionate kiss and embraced both girls. "You've replaced me?" she teased the girls. "No, Breezy, you're irreplaceable. You know that," I joked back. She seemed genuinely pleased. I assured the girls that we were still friends, which we were, friends with benefits. We still shared great closeness together, sometimes once a week or more, with fervent lovemaking during her week-long stays. She simply didn't have time for a husband, and I doubted she'd ever marry again. We cared for each other, but marriage wasn't in the cards for us. As lovers, we got along great, but as spouses, we argued incessantly. "So, who are your new friends?" she inquired, smiling at them, leaving them starstruck. "I'm Maggie, and she's Stokely," Maggie introduced. "Nice to meet you," Bree greeted them. "You know this guy's dangerous, right?" "Not to us," Stokely remarked. "I think he could be dangerous to someone he's enemies with. He has a club and a very large dog." Bree nudged Grandma with her boot, and he grunted in protest. "Hey, big guy." She knelt down and embraced him. "Do you miss me?" He rolled his eyes but lacked the energy to lift his head. "What's on your mind, Mac?" she asked. "Why'd you want to talk to me?" "Not that I mind being invited to dinner. He's a fantastic cook, girls, if you can motivate him." "I think he cooked lamb chops." "We've never had anything like this," Maggie remarked. "Well, then I'm in for a treat." "But what's the occasion?" she pressed. We had dinner, and I explained. "We need your help, Breezy," I informed her. "We're clueless about legal matters. The girls are orphans. Well, their father might be alive, but no one knows where he is. He abandoned them, and their mother was eliminated. They were in foster care, and some creep started intimidating them. They ran away and are living on the streets. They were rummaging through my trash for food, and I caught them. Now we're trying to figure out a way to keep them off the streets." She studied me for a moment. "You want them, don't you?" "Goodness, Mac, you've always wanted children, and because I didn't give you any, you want them, don't you?" I blushed. "Yes, I do. I kind of do." "What do you think is the best approach, Bree?" "I don't think it's feasible," she responded. "No family court will give you 2 young girls. You're a solitary man. This is a recipe for disaster. They won't approve it." I glanced at the girls, who stared back at me with wide eyes. "What's wrong?" I inquired. Their gazes met before they broke into tears and rushed to hug me. "You really want to keep us with you?" Stokely choked out between sobs. "I can't believe it. I never thought we'd find anyone. Anyone." She struggled to speak through her tears. I held them close. "Yes, girls, I did consider it. You need someone to care for you. I need someone too. I thought maybe we could do it together." Their small bodies trembled as they clung to me. I looked helplessly at Bri as tears streaked down her cheeks. She glanced between the girls and me. "Darn it, Mac, look at what you've done to me. Just when I think I've got you figured out, you surprise me. What am I going to do with you?" There was a peculiar expression on her face, as if she were seeing me in a new light. "Let me think about this for a few days. Girls, you're coming with me. It wouldn't work if you stayed here with Mac. It would ruin everything if anyone found out. Mac, we're taking Grandma with us. I can't leave him here, and he'll have to take care of them." She swept out of the house like a whirlwind, carrying Grandma with her, and drove off in her Mercedes. "I'll call you," she promised. She called 3 times for about 30 seconds each over the next 2 weeks. I didn't see her or the girls until she phoned me Friday morning, saying she wanted to meet for dinner at Alfonso's, a charming Italian restaurant in Pontiac where we often dined. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at the bar with men circling around her. As soon as she spotted me, she left them gaping and came over to me. We walked to our booth. She nudged me and sat beside me, which was unusual as she typically sat across from me, indicating something was different. We placed our orders and she remained silent for a while. "You know I love you, right, Mac?" she finally began. "Yes, I love you too," I replied. "I don't mean I love your mom or anything like that. I'm in love with you, Mac. I always have been since that day at Cedar Point. You're the only man I've ever loved or will ever love," she confessed. "I trust you completely. I love everything about you except being married to you. You know me, I like my freedom. No commitments, no baggage, nothing tying me down. I love my job and my life, but I don't love them any more than I love you. And I don't have to choose. You're as faithful as Grandma. We understand each other. I'm not physically engaged with anyone but you. I've never felt this way before. You've always understood me. That's why what I'm about to propose will sound incredibly strange." I chuckled. "Sounds like I'm in for a surprise." She shot me a, "You fool" look. "Yes, you are. Will you marry me, Mac?" Bree asked, her voice soft yet determined. I nearly choked on my wine. Choking on wine isn't ideal. When I regained my composure, I sat there dumbfounded. Stop playing around and give me an answer, she snapped. Absolutely not, I finally managed. Why, Bri? We just make each other miserable. We'll be at each other's throats in a month. What's wrong with what we have now? Nothing, she agreed. This isn't about us. It's about the sweetest, most adorable girls on the planet, Mac. I'm head over heels in love with them. You turned my world upside down when you invited me over that night. They're desperate to see you. They cry and beg me every night to come and see you. The problem is, I won't give them up. I've never had as much fun and joy in my life as I have with them. None of us have a stable home life. No judge in their right mind would give them to any of us. But if we were married, they'd grant us custody in a heartbeat. So I need them, and I'll have to take you as part of the deal. If you want them, you'll have to put up with me. Can we make this work, Mac? I doubt it, I told her. You're as troublesome as me. You come home drunk, you're always late for everything except work, and sometimes you don't come home at all or even call. Come on, Bree, we've already been down that road. I know, she sighed. But what if things could be different this time? Her voice softened, pleading. I can't wait to get back home at night now. I always let them know if I'm running late, and ever since they came into my life, I've only been having 1 glass of wine each night. I never imagined I could feel this way. Marry me, Mac. Give us a chance. Her eyes glistened as she looked at me, vulnerability on full display. I think there's something we need to discuss, I interjected. Go ahead. What's on your mind? Are we just going to talk in circles here? Tell me what's on your mind. Do you want me to start? She asked, her fingers playing with the edge of her napkin. I took a long sip of my drink and motioned for another glass of wine from the waiter. Go ahead, I encouraged her. What drives me crazy about you is your need to control everything, she declared. You want to know every detail of my life, where I am, who I'm with, what I'm doing, when I'll be home. It's like you're paranoid. If you could just let go and allow me to be myself, maybe we'd still be together. But you'll never be able to do that. It's maddening. Surely you know by now that you're the only person I've ever been interested in. You do know that, right, Mac? Yeah, probably, I admitted. It used to get under my skin. I was afraid you'd find someone else and leave me. That's never going to happen, she assured me. I haven't even thought about another person since the day I met you. Sure, I go out to dinners with clients and colleagues. I hit the dance floor with groups, both men and women. I'm having fun. That's just who I am. But since meeting you, no one has ever come close to touching me lovingly, and they never will. Do you believe me? Yes, I do. It's the same for me. I trust you, Bri. I know you'd never do anything to hurt me. You're just so carefree and independent. I'm as in love with you as I was on our wedding day. I think you feel the same about me, and we were comfortable where we were, I acknowledged. Well, I'm not comfortable with that anymore, she stated firmly. There are 2 girls who need a family. I love them nearly as much as I love you. I love them more than my job. I want to be a part of their lives, and I can see that can only happen if we do it together. So, will you give me a chance, Mac? Will you marry me and try to love me so we can have this family together? I sat in silence, processing her words. Could I really go down this road again? Was it worth the risk of reopening old wounds? I'll never have children of my own. I'm too vain and selfish for that, Bree continued. But we can take these girls. Marry me, Mac, and I'll do everything I can to make you incredibly happy. Okay, I finally acquiesced. Clearly, you've had time to think about this. Give me some time too, okay? She glanced at her watch. You've got 20 minutes, she informed me. Oh, great, so now there's a deadline, I quipped. Yes, they'll be waiting outside in 20 minutes, she confirmed. They should arrive in 10 minutes. They'll walk with Grandma for about 10 minutes, then a car will pick us up to take us to your place. We wrapped up our meal quickly and stepped outside. A limo was waiting, but the girls were still absent. The driver mentioned they were out with the dog, not seeming too pleased about it, perhaps due to potential drool on the upholstery. After a short wait, I spotted them hurrying toward us. Let go, Maggie, Stokely urged as they neared. There's a sketchy guy eyeing us. Grandma's not a fan, he growled. Glancing down the sidewalk, I noticed a young man approaching. He looked about 20, adorned with tattoos and piercings, his attire giving off a wannabe tough guy vibe. What's your deal? He snapped at me. Nothing. We're leaving, I replied. Looks like everything's yours. A fancy jacket, lovely ladies, and a big ride, he remarked. Seems like you're flush with cash. The guy was out of his mind. I towered over him by 8 inches and outweighed him by at least 100 pounds, not to mention lacking his protruding gut. You best be moving along, buddy, I warned. My dog here is not fond of you. Closing in on about 40, he retorted. But I ain't scared of no dog. His hand reached under his jacket to his waistband, revealing a glint of metal. Without hesitation, I delivered a swift kick to his chest, sending him sprawling backward. A weapon tumbled from his waistband to the ground. Startled, Maggie dropped. Grandma's leash. As the guy lunged, Grandma shielded his face as Grandma clamped down on his forearm, eliciting a pained yelp and a torn sleeve from his hooded sweatshirt. "Up, Granville," I commanded, and he obediently resumed his place beside me. The assailant, now sweating on the ground, gazed up at me as I approached, Grandma at my side. "Go ahead, Grandma," I instructed. Grandma lunged forward, his massive jaws closing around the man's neck, freezing him in terror. "You're a real piece of work," I spat at him. "Got a few screws loose?" His head nodded ever so slightly, terror etched on his face. "Say it," I demanded. Silence ensued. "Bite, Grandma," I urged. A muffled scream escaped the man as blood trickled down his neck, Grandma's powerful jaws sinking into his flesh. "Say it," I pressed. "I'm a piece of work," he choked out. "How much cash you carrying?" I interrogated. Handing it over reluctantly, he reached into his pocket, prompting Grandma to tighten his grip. "Slowly," I cautioned. When he turned over, he produced a bundle and passed it to me. "Release him, Grandma," I ordered. Reluctantly, he obeyed, and the man hastily backed away. "I'll give you a 20-yard head start," I warned. "After that, he's coming for you. Suggest you make tracks with the speed of a sprinter." The man darted off, but his pants slid down, causing him to stumble. Hastily readjusting, he fled, clutching his trousers with his uninjured hand. I yelled out, "You need a belt." Turning to the girls, I found all three of them frozen in astonishment. Swiftly, I kicked the weapon into the storm drain. "What's wrong?" I asked. Bree was the first to react. "You're one tough cookie, Mac. Note to self, never get on your bad side." The girls rushed over to me, and I embraced them. "Oh my God," murmured Stokely into my chest. "I was scared of that guy, but you handled it like a boss." "Thank you. You did this for us, didn't you?" "Well, no one messes with my girls," I reassured her. "He left you a little something for your college fund," I added, handing her the bundle. She counted it. It totaled $700. He must have robbed a few more unsuspecting folks. Later, she split it with Maggie, and we piled into the car. Glancing back, I hugged Maggie and noticed something. "A van is pulling up," I remarked. "I know," Bree confirmed. "It's got some of our stuff." I arched an eyebrow at her. "Yeah, I'm aware I tend to take a lot for granted," she chuckled. "Girls," Mac addressed them, "we're tying the knot again and keeping you with us." They gasped and squealed. "Really?" Maggie turned to Mac. "She's not so bad after all. You were right. We adore Bree. She's been so good to us. We've got heaps of new clothes, and she got us into this amazing school. We'll make you proud, promise. We won't let you down." "We know you won't, honey," Bree reassured them. "Don't sweat it," she added. I was somewhat stunned. I tried to speak, but the words eluded me. "You okay, Mac?" Stokely inquired. Bree chuckled. "He's not. He goes into full-on panic mode. His perfectly ordered world's turned upside down. His house is always immaculate, everything's in pristine condition. We'll have our underwear hanging in his shower, mix up his books, leave rings on the coffee table. It'll drive him nuts. I honestly don't know how he'll cope with Granville. We'll have to love him so much that crumbs on the table won't bother him." "Or can we handle that?" I groaned. "I never agreed to any of this," I said. "Breeze like a hurricane sweeps us off our feet, turns everything topsy-turvy." "Do you love Bree?" Stokely asked me. "Yes, but from across town," I tried to clarify. "But we all need to be together," Maggie chimed in. They all burst into laughter at this, and I couldn't help but join in. It was all so absurd. How did things spiral out of control like this? As usual, Brianna had managed to turn my little mission to help some girls into a full-blown marriage and adoption plan. Small actions can really throw your life off course, I mused. "This is a harebrained scheme," I told Bree as we arrived at my house. There was a flurry of activity as movers carried in heaps of belongings and distributed them to various rooms. To my surprise, stacks of women's clothing kept appearing in Maggie's and Stokely's rooms, one after the other. "Where'd you girls get all this?" I asked Maggie as she hurried past. "Bree took us shopping a few times," she said, vanishing into her room. Bree stuck her head out of my room. "Gosh, Mac, do you ever get rid of anything? You still have stuff from when we got married." "I'm tossing this. I need drawer and closet space." I rushed to rescue my school jacket with letters from the trash heap. "Cut it out, Brianna," I shouted. "These things can't be thrown away. If I didn't want it, I wouldn't have it. This is my home, and I'll boot your skinny rear out if you don't quit." She shot me a fierce look. "Skinny rear, huh?" She snickered, grabbing me by the sleeve of my jacket. She pulled me into the bedroom. It looked like a tornado hit. In one swift move, she locked the door, slipped off her dress, and leaned over, placing her hands on the bed. It took my breath away. She wasn't wearing any underwear. The next morning, we made love and I slept until 10, then stumbled into the shower. By the time I shaved and showered, I started feeling somewhat human. Bree was still asleep, her flame-colored hair spilling over her face as she lay on her stomach. God, her backside was incredible. I headed to the living room, where Grandma was snoring, drooling over a stack of my best shirts. I sighed, grabbing a glass of orange juice and a bun. "Come on, Grandma, let's get out of this mess." He lifted his head, rolled his eyes, and got up with a groan. We went out to the backyard, where he did his business, then came over to lie on my legs, basking in the sun. I felt as lazy as a fat lizard, enjoying the warmth of an unusually warm day for this time of year. The door opened, and Stokely stepped out with a glass of milk and a bun. "Hi, Angel," I waved. "Hey, Mac." She closed the door, standing for a moment before making her way to the glider where I was sitting. "Is there enough space for me?" she asked. I shifted over, and she settled onto my lap, resting her feet in the space I made. Curling up with a sigh, she took a bite of the bun, her big green eyes locking onto mine. "Mac," she began, crumbs scattering across our laps. I interrupted. "Eat first, then talk." She giggled but stayed silent until her mouth was empty. "Mac," she resumed, "if you adopt us, will you be our dad and Bri our mom?" "Would you want that?" I asked. "Oh yes," she said. "Bri would be the coolest mom ever. You might not be cool, but you're dependable. I love you, and I think you'd make the best dad." I was nearly speechless. "Well," I mumbled, "being dependable is good, even if it's not cool." She chuckled. "I didn't mean it like that. I mean, she's like a whirlwind, and you're like a mountain, you know? She really, really loves you. She talks about you all the time. She's told us everything about you and her. Do you love her?" "Yes, dear, but as you said, she's a whirlwind. It's like trying to love a thunderstorm or a forest fire." "Mountains don't mind thunderstorms or forest fires," she said, looking at me. "Maggie kind of resembles her. I'm more like you." She nestled against my chest. "I think if we wanted to, we could just let them whirl around us, and we'd be the calm in the center of their storm," she said, looking at me again. "I want you to be our dad, Mac. I never thought we'd find someone like you and Bree, too." She shed a few tears. "We were so scared and so alone. Mac, is there space in your life for girls like us?" I pulled her closer to me. "In my heart, Stokely, there's always been a place for someone like you and Maggie. To love me for years, I never thought I'd have something like this." Bree had never shown any interest in having kids. "I think you girls changed her life as much as you changed mine. I've seen the way she looks at you. It's like she woke up one day and realized she loves being a mom. I've never seen anything affect her the way you do." "You were right about her," she admitted. "She's amazing. Sometimes it's just incredible. She decides to do something, and you're along for the ride." I chuckled. "I know, right? She's always been like that." The first time we met, a group of U.S. college students went to an amusement park. She decided I'd be her ride partner. I actually came because I was interested in someone else. She whisked me away, and we never saw the others in our group again. We were 20, and I fell for her that day. She's like a force of nature that just sweeps in and takes over your life. We had our first fight a month after we got married. "What was it about?" she asked, curious. "You'll find this funny. It was about shoes. She kept moving mine and putting hers in their place. I had to rummage through her stuff to find mine. She says I'm obsessed. Maybe she's right, but is it too much to ask her to keep her shoes on her side of the closet?" She just exploded. Then I drove her nuts, and she drove me nuts. I've got a plan for what I'm doing tomorrow, and she's totally spontaneous. It's part of who she is, and I love it. But it drives me nuts. She loves how organized I am, but it drives her nuts. These things clash, and we just get on each other's nerves. Stokely giggled. "Maggie and I argue about things like this, too. She spends half her life searching for what she's lost. She'll get up and decide on a whim what we're doing." "I think we need to adapt a bit, Mac," Stokely added thoughtfully. "We need to go with the flow more. They need to understand that we like things in their place. Can we work this out?" I don't know," I replied. "We never really had a reason to try. Bree and I have a strange relationship. I love her more than ever now, and I think she feels the same, but she's not one to talk about it, she just does. We're closer now than when we were married, and I have affection for her. During our marriage, I didn't do much. I loved her, but we were constantly upset with each other. We sort of just got married without really feeling the need to change. I think we were too immature and selfish, but it somehow worked for us. Perhaps we needed someone like you to make us realize what we were missing. The notion of being a family is both thrilling and frightening. What if we mess it up? We're gambling everything on a leap of faith. I detest uncertainty." "I understand," Stokely said, "but sometimes you just have to take a leap. You can't expect to gain anything good without the risk of it going wrong." I embraced her, and she purred like a kitten. "You're the wisest 11-year-old I've ever met," I remarked. "I'll be 12 next month," she corrected. She finished her bun and we headed back to the house. The other two hadn't risen yet, so we took Grandma for a walk. By the time we returned, the late risers were finally up. Bree has never been a morning person, and it seems Maggie isn't either. They both resembled beautiful, tousled, sleepy cats, stretching and yawning for a good while. After their showers, they transformed into human dynamos. Bree whisked us away to obtain our marriage license, file for adoption, arrange temporary custody, and then go out for dinner. We had seafood, and the girls were thrilled with how tasty it was. They were particularly impressed with the prices. "Wow, Mac, you must be raking in the dough," Maggie exclaimed. I chuckled. "I'm comfortable," I assured her. "I don't mind sharing that I earn around $90,000 a year. I could support all of us if needed." "Bree makes 10 times more than me," I added. They stared at her, stunned for a moment. She laughed. "It's just money," she said. "The point is, we can afford to treat you girls to dinner whenever you want. Mac can cook most things better than restaurants if we can convince him to." "You cook?" Maggie inquired. "Yes, but mostly simple dishes," she replied. "Anyone can follow a recipe, but he's a culinary genius." "She's really quite skilled," I affirmed. I told them if she could just overcome her habit of being easily distracted, she'd be fantastic. She playfully hit me. "Make one mistake and he'll never let you live it down," she teased. "During our first year of marriage, we didn't have a dog that would eat burnt food. If you throw it in the trash, the whole house stinks." She used to take it out to the backyard and leave it at the base of a tree. It was as if we were making a burnt offering to the tree. Goodness, they laughed heartily. Bree was in a particularly good mood and nestled up to me. I hugged her tightly, and the girls giggled. "We've never dined at a place like this," Maggie remarked. "Maggie," Bree addressed her with a serious tone, "that's not going to happen if you keep talking like that. You'll kick Mac out of the house within a week. I know you can do better. Try again." Maggie pondered for a moment. "We've never dined at a place like this," she stated with a triumphant smile as I nodded in agreement. "We know how to speak," Bree interjected. "I mean truly speak," she clarified. "We just fell into the habit of talking like everyone else on the street. We attended school until my mother passed away. We excelled academically." "I believe in you, dear," I reassured her. "I'm confident you'll succeed. Though we're from Detroit, we possess sophistication." The girls appeared on the verge of bursting with pride. Bree also gave them etiquette lessons. They mimicked her attire, learned her mannerisms, and emulated her grooming habits. After 6 months, one might have assumed they had been raised and educated in New England amidst high society for their entire lives. They adapted quickly, excelling academically. That evening marked the beginning. Bree was exhilarated upon our return home. She instructed the girls to turn on the TV and leave it on all night. They looked at her with curiosity. "Your father and I need some time alone," she winked at them. They erupted into hysterical giggles, blushing beet red. Bree pulled me into the bedroom. "We're celebrating," she informed me. "What's the occasion?" I inquired. "It's the beginning of something amazing," she declared. "I love you, Mac. Never doubt it. We'll do this every night. I'll remind you of my love, then show you how. We've always been explosive in bed. Tonight, I want to take it to a whole new level, and then we'll maintain this level for the rest of our lives. Do you understand?" "Show me," I challenged. She unpinned her hair, letting it cascade down, rarely worn loose. It reached the top of her backside, thick and wavy, twirling like a dancer's ribbon as she approached me. Turning her back, she whispered, "Unleash the lightning." I unzipped her blue dress, my knuckles trailing down her spine. She winced, stepping aside and releasing her locks into the air. Dropping her shoulders, the dress fell, briefly grazing her chest and thighs before pooling at her feet. Exiting gracefully, her heels accentuated her calves. She was magnificent. Men orbited around her like moths to a flame, but her smoldering intensity focused solely on me, making me feel special. Her hand slipped behind her back, and her bra fell away, revealing her impressive bosom against her creamy white skin. "I think someone's overdressed," she teased. "What shall we do about it?" I inquired. Pushing me onto the bed, she straddled me, her scent masking the Chanel she wore, subtle and seductive. Undoing my shirt buttons, she freed me from my trousers, leaving my hands restrained. Pushing me back, she undid my belt and pants, sliding them off along with my boots and socks. It was a new level of sensuality. She exuded heat, a creature of allure and mystery. In that moment, I realized how deeply I loved her, willing to sacrifice anything for her without hesitation. Our lovemaking became intense and wild, unlike anything before. Locking eyes with me, she raised her head. Mac, I love you, she confessed. I've always known it. I'm selfish, I admit it. I've never truly given myself to anyone until now. Do you want me, Mac? For the first time in my life, I'm ready to be your partner, your lover, your wife, the mother of our girls. Will you guide me, love me, and be patient with me? I swear you'll never regret it. I'm ready, Mac, if you'll have me. Do you love me as much? I silenced her with a passionate kiss. I love you more than anything, I declared. But you'll need to guide me too. Be patient with me as I am with you. I've always loved you. Together, we can do this. I'll do anything for you, she whispered. For the girls too. I never imagined I could feel this way. They came into my life, and I can't help but love them. I'm scared, Mac, terrified I'll be a bad mother. It's always been my fear, which is why I never entertained the thought of having children. I fear I'll ruin them. I don't know how to be a father either, I chuckled. But I suspect I'll be a great one. It's something you learn by doing. No one knows what they're doing until they do it. I don't know how to be a husband either, at least not a good one. We messed up the first time, Brianna. I know, she whispered. Mostly me. I was so immature. Sure, in many ways I still am, Mac, but I'll try my best to grow. Yes, me too, I said, holding her close. Eventually, we drifted off to sleep. Upon waking, we took a shower together, giggling like school children. After drying off, she slipped into her pajamas. What's the plan? I inquired. If I'm not mistaken, we'll have guests soon, she replied with a smile. You better get dressed too. I'm too lazy to get up now, I groaned, throwing on some boxers and a t-shirt. Within 10 minutes of getting back into bed, there was a knock at the door. Come in, Bree called out. Stokely popped her head in, her face lighting up at the sight of us. She darted across the room to join us, inadvertently leaving the door ajar, allowing our furry friend to saunter in and settle across our legs, purring contentedly. A few minutes later, Maggie joined the fray, and we engaged in an impromptu wrestling match with Grandma. Despite his size, Grandma emerged victorious. We bundled him up in a blanket and escorted him out of the bedroom. Finally free from his presence, we all piled back into bed for some cuddles. About 30 minutes later, hunger pangs struck. So we headed to the diner for breakfast at 2 p.m. Bree announced that we had an appointment but kept the details under wraps. She led us to the municipal court. What's going on? I asked. The most important case of my life, she chuckled, ushering us into one of the courtrooms where the magistrate awaited, asking if we were ready. Ready for what? I wondered aloud. Bree knelt down, producing a box from her purse. Mac, will you marry me again? She asked. This time, I promise it's forever. You know I never stopped loving you or wanting to be your wife. You're the only man I've ever loved or will ever love. Please, Mac, marry me. In the box were our wedding rings along with hers. Are you sure, Brianna? I inquired. I've never been more sure, she said, turning to the girls for support. He's so stubborn. Yes, please, Mac, they chimed in. Bri really loves you. We want to be a family. We love you too, and we love Bree. How could I say no? It took about 10 minutes, and it was official. Bree treated us to dinner at a new Greek restaurant to celebrate. As I looked around, I saw my future unfolding before me. The most beautiful woman in the world as my wife and 2 lovely daughters, who would grow into remarkable women. Could we make it work? Only time would tell. It took about a month to gain custody of the girls. Bree worked tirelessly to make it happen. When we finally did, they were overjoyed, and we were ecstatic. Bree sold her apartment and we settled into life in my house. I worried that Bree and I might get on each other's nerves, especially at first. About 3 weeks after remarrying, we had a minor spat when Bree went to dinner with a client and forgot to call us. When she got back home, she was met with 6 accusing eyes. What? She asked. Stokely picked up the phone and Bree's eyes filled with understanding. She opened her mouth and burst into tears, gathering us all on the couch. She knelt down in front of us and started sobbing. I'm so sorry, she managed. I just forgot to call. I should have. Please don't be mad at me. I'll try not to do it again. I can't promise, but I'll tell my assistant to remind me. I was so focused on finishing the meeting and getting home. Do you forgive me, Stokely, Maggie, Mac? I'm really sorry. Bree rarely apologized, maybe a dozen times in her life. This marked the start of a completely new dynamic between us. We both made efforts to keep each other happy, and the girls were incredible at helping us. Sometimes it felt like they were the adults and we were the kids. We had a few minor disagreements, but I'd never felt so content and happy. There was a private school on the campus where I taught, and Bree enrolled the girls there. They traveled with me to and from school, and during these trips we bonded. They confided in me about everything, filling my life with their enthusiasm. After classes, we'd head home. They'd do their homework, usually taking a couple of hours. Once they were done, we'd take Grandma for a walk. Dinner started at 5 if we were eating at home. Bri usually got back by 6:30. If she was running late, she'd call, and on those nights, we'd dine out. When Maggie turned 16, Bri asked what she wanted for her birthday. She said she wanted her driver's license. She studied and practiced for 2 weeks and passed the exams on her first try. The night before her birthday, Bri brought it up in bed. "I want to buy her a car," she said. "What kind?" I asked. "A new Camaro convertible," she replied. "How much?" I inquired. "Does it matter?" she retorted. "No, not really," I replied. "I just like to know everything, Bri." "I know," she said, kissing me. "I think we can get the one I want for around $60,000. I whistled. "That's a hefty price tag, but she's an amazing girl. She deserves it." "Yes," Brianna smiled. "There's been a lot of bad in their lives, Mac. Let's make sure they only have good now." We ordered the car, bright yellow with black stripes and interior, a big V8. Against my judgment, Brianna thought it would hold its value better, and she was probably right. Either way, I knew it would drive Maggie crazy. When the car arrived, we parked it in the garage as it was time to leave for school. The girls grabbed their bags and followed me to the car. Bri was in the garage, and I didn't unlock the doors. "Dad," Stokely said, "let us in." "Not today," I said. "You'll drive Maggie? Mom isn't going to work?" she asked. "No, she's leaving," I replied. "Then how will I get there?" she asked. I pressed the garage door opener. "You're driving," I said, pointing inside. Her eyes widened, and Maggie began to cry. I jumped out of the car, and Brianna rushed down the driveway. We hugged Maggie together. "What's wrong, dear?" I asked. "We thought you'd be happy. This is your car. We're giving it to you for your birthday." She tried to speak, but she was too upset for us to understand. She buried her face in my chest, and we held and comforted her until she calmed down enough to talk. Stokely joined us, and finally we got Maggie to speak. "I don't need a car," she choked out. "I love you guys so much, and this is too much. We don't want you to feel like you have to buy us things. Stokely and I already talked about this. We don't need anything. We just need you to love us." She broke down again. "Honey, we really do love you," Brianna reassured her. "We love you both, more than anything in the world. Having you girls is a dream come true for both of us. We love buying things for you. We work hard and earn a lot of money so we can buy things for our girls. Making you happy is how we show our love. It might not be a grand gesture, but it's our way." Stokely was in tears now too. I kissed them both on the cheeks. "Let's go," I said. "This is a really cool car. Let's at least go take a look." They wiped their eyes and let me lead them to the garage. I opened the door for Maggie, and Brianna helped Stokely into the passenger seat. Maggie gripped the steering wheel and looked at me. A smile spread across her beautiful face. "It suits you," I told her. "Start her up." The powerful V8 engine roared to life, and they both trembled with excitement. I closed the door and tapped on the window. Maggie lowered it, and I kissed her again. "See you at school," I said. She pulled out onto the street and paused. Bri and I stood nearby, watching. Then her door swung open, and she leapt out, throwing herself into our arms and showering us with kisses. "I love you so much," she repeated. "Thank you. You're the best mom and dad in the world." She dashed back to her car, and they drove off. I turned to Brianna, who was crying like a baby for some inexplicable reason. Tears filled my own eyes. "Look at us," I said. "You'd think there were 3 of us or something. That was a wonderful idea, Bri. You're an amazing woman." We hugged each other tightly for a long while. I knew I'd be late for class, but I didn't mind. When Stokely turned 16, we gave her the same car. It wasn't as emotional, but it was still special. We took them to Hawaii and bought them bikes when they graduated from high school. Maggie was already in college. The day Stokely started college, I came home to find Brianna crying on the couch. I sat beside her, hugged her, and we sat in silence for a while. She rested her head on my chest and cried softly. Finally, she looked up at me, tears filling her big blue eyes. "Our kids are all grown up, Mac," she said. "I know," I replied, kissing her. "It's what kids do." She cupped my face in her hands, looking into my eyes. "Let's have another one, Mac," she said. "This time, just you and me. I want a baby, Mac." Overwhelmed, she started crying again. "I never thought this would happen. I love you so much, and I already miss them terribly. I want to experience it all over again. It was so incredible. I know they're only 60 miles away, but I miss them." "Me too, kitten," I said. "Maybe if we're going to have this baby, we should go practice." She gasped, staring at me. "Really? Do you want that? I mean, to have a baby?" "Of course," I said. I hope it's a red-haired girl like you. I love you with all my heart, Brianna. I scooped her up and carried her through the empty house to our bedroom to start practicing. We had to shoo Granville out, but I found I rather enjoyed making babies. As I drifted off to sleep, the picture on the nightstand of Maggie and Stokely held my gaze. They didn't look like a Ford, not at all.